Chapter 323. Hearing Fang Yuhuang's words, King Qilin sneered and said, "Even if he is fine now, I'm afraid it will be soon. Other than the Queen of Heaven, who has reached the 6th level, there are more than 20 level 5 elites who are attacking Tianjing. Do you think Li Anping still has a chance to survive?" Once King Qilin's words came out, it shocked everyone at the scene. One level 6 aptitude user and more than 20 level 5 aptitude users. Normally, a level 5 aptitude user was a rare sight. They were definitely important figures who had the power to overturn a country. Not to mention that there were more than 20 level 5 aptitude users. This was a force that could change the course of human history. Even Li Anping might not be a match for this force. Most of the people at the scene thought so. Even Zui Yu and the Dragon Sparrow Guards couldn't help but worry. Moreover, Li Anping still hadn't shown up. Tianjing's defense formation also didn't respond. This made some people even more certain of King Qilin's words. Is King Qilin telling the truth? If there are really so many people attacking His Majesty? Zui Yu started to get nervous. Fang Yuhuang was silent after hearing this. He still didn't open the 33 paradises and trapped King Qilin in the same place. Seeing his father still hesitating, King Qilin said angrily, "Father, why are you still hesitating? Whether it is Li Anping or Xia, they are all dead. Do you still want to stop them? Do you think you can stop the revenge of so many level 5 aptitude users? You can die if you want, but don't take the whole Baiwei Empire with you." Fang Yuhuang frowned and said, "Li Anping won't be defeated so easily." Compared to King Qilin, who was killed by Li Anping instantly, Fang Yuhuang knew more about Li Anping's power. What he was most worried about was that with so many aptitude users here, they might not be able to kill Li Anping and let him escape. Then, everyone would suffer from Li Anping's crazy revenge. Especially someone like him who had betrayed them. He would be Li Anping's #1 target for revenge. After thinking about it, Fang Yuhuang did not dare to remove the 33 paradises in the end. King Qilin glared at Fang Yuhuang and understood his opponent's plan. His good imperial father was probably trying to play both sides. He wanted to be in a stalemate with him here, and when there was definite news, he would help the other side. Unfortunately, his power was restrained by the 33 paradises. Now that the Jade Emperor had changed the space around King Qilin, there was nothing he could do. At this moment, a black stream of qi swept across everyone in the auditorium. Ordinary people didn't notice anything unusual, but Fang Yuhuang, King Qilin, and Left Vein's expression changed. Some were happy, some were angry, and some were afraid. Because that stream of qi brought about a violent and murderous intent, it was too obvious. It was Li Anping's qi. In fact, Li Anping's hearing was enough to cover the entire Tianjing. Almost every corner of Tianjing was under his surveillance. All the developments in the auditorium were under his control. The reason why he didn't go over was because the situation in some places was more critical. For example, the entire palace. Li Anping was in the sky above the palace. Behind him, the black stream of qi flashed and the qi incarnation appeared with the Sword of Legacy. After delivering the Sword of Legacy, the qi incarnation flew in the direction of Xia Long K base. In midair, Li Anping held the sword with one hand. The black stream of qi surged out and covered the entire palace. Li Anping closed his eyes. Screams, roars, explosions, running sounds, the sound of swords slicing through skin, and the sound of bullets piercing through the air. At this moment, all of them entered his mind and intertwined with the blueprint of the entire palace. Together with the scanning of qi, it formed a perfect moving map. The ones who attacked the palace were Li Anping's clones from the Violet clan. Each of them was as strong as Li Anping, who had fought with the Warrior of Destruction Tom in Jadeite City. They even surpassed him in terms of strength. Each of these clones was equivalent to a powerful level 4 ability user. Even level 5 ability users would have trouble dealing with them. Therefore, when they invaded the palace, the Imperial Guards were defeated without any resistance. Even the leader, Scorpion, was seriously injured and unconscious. He was sent to the depths of the palace. In just 10 minutes, less than a tenth of the Imperial Guards were left. On the other hand, there were almost no casualties among the clones. The blood of the Imperial Guards dyed the entire palace red. There are 2,000 enemies in total. There are still 3,000 Imperial Guards left. They are escaping with the women and officials toward the auditorium. The voices were constantly transmitted to Li Anping's ears. Together with the qi that covered the entire palace, the voices and location of each enemy were transmitted to his mind. At this moment, Li Anping knew the location of everyone in the palace. The legacy in his hand stirred in the air. His hand and the sword created a series of afterimages, cutting through the air at a frequency of thousands of times per second, creating shock waves in the air. Not only was the legacy made of adamantium, its sturdiness was unparalleled in the world. It had also received Emma's spatial cut, so it was countless times sharper than before. A white light flashed from the legacy. Countless sword lights and sword mists slashed toward the palace as Li Anping swung the sword. There were 2,000 sword auras in total. They flew past at supersonic speed, like a brilliant meteor shower, covering the entire palace. Everywhere they passed, no matter if it was the walls, the roof, or the combat uniforms, everything was cut in half. No clone could dodge or block any of the sword auras. The 2,000 clones corresponded to the 2,000 sword auras. They were either slashed in half at the waist, beheaded, or smashed into pieces. In almost the same second, all of them turned into minced corpses. At the sight of this, the entire Imperial Guards broke out into thunderous cheers. They looked at Li Anping in midair and cheered. After killing all the invaders in the palace, Li Anping raised his head. His gaze seemed to pierce through layers of space and look toward a certain existence in the sky. 10,000 meters above the palace, the ark that looked like a black coffin was floating slowly. The person in charge of the operation, Violet, had a head of white hair. He looked at the palace on the screen and revealed an excited smile. The League of Stars had spent money to hire them for this operation. They had also provided them with the ark. Very good. The actual battle this time was very successful. The elderly man looked at the rows of data and said slowly, "If we can get the mother's corpse this time, the clone warrior's stats will definitely increase again." Saying this, he turned to ask his assistant, "How are the casualties at the moment?" The assistant tapped on his damaged tablet and reported, "There aren't any casualties at the moment. I believe that it's only a matter of time before we take over the entire palace." Just then, a staff member suddenly exclaimed, "Li Anping is here." As the screen continued to zoom in, Li Anping's appearance in the sky above the palace appeared before everyone's eyes. The white-haired elderly man revealed a fanatical expression as he looked at Li Anping, who was in midair. His gaze was as if he was looking at an unparalleled beauty. However, before he could give any orders, Li Anping swung his sword with his right hand. White sword auras scattered out toward the entire palace. The white-haired elderly man looked at the screen in disbelief. The data representing the clones was decreasing rapidly. In less than 1 second, all the clones were killed. Faced with the real Li Anping, they were like toys, unable to put up any resistance. One of the staff members exclaimed, "This is bad. He seems to have discovered us." "What?" Before the white-haired elderly man could react, Li Anping's figure on the screen flashed and disappeared. "Where did he go? Can't find him. His speed is too fast. He's advancing toward us." One of the staff members screamed, "He's coming over. His speed is over Mach 10. He's already here." "Where?" the elderly man asked anxiously. However, no one answered. He roared out in fear, "Who can tell me where he is?" The assistant tapped on the tablet in his hand with a pale face. Li Anping's appearance appeared on the screen once again. He said in a trembling voice, "He's right above us." The elderly man stared at Li Anping on the screen. What is he trying to do? No one answered the elderly man's question. All the staff members stopped what they were doing and looked at Lianping on the screen. At this moment, their lives were all in the hands of this man. As for Lianping, the legacy sword in his hand vibrated again. It streaked across the air with a series of afterimages. This time, one horizontal and one vertical, two sword energy waves that were more than 1 kilometer long slashed directly at the black arc. Rumble! The entire arc shook violently. The white-haired elderly man grabbed the seat tightly and looked at Lianping on the screen with a face full of despair. He never expected Lianping to discover them from so far away. He also never expected that the clones and the Ark would be so vulnerable in front of him. Where's the Heavenly Queen? Where's the Titan? Where did they go? Why did Lianping come back to attack us? Beside him, the staff members and assistants were panicking and trying to escape. Some of them were full of despair and looked like they had lost all hope. Lianping's two sword energy waves slashed the Ark along the cross line and split it into 4 parts. The staff members looked at the arc that had been split into 4 parts and kept exploding and collapsing. They could not understand how Lianping had done it. In the next moment, the entire arc had already collapsed into countless parts, falling towards the sky. However, before it could fall much further, it was covered by even more densely packed waves of sword chi, turning into countless pieces that drifted towards the ground. Chapter 324. While Lianping was cleaning up the invaders inside and outside Tianjing City one after another. At the center of the defense formation, the doctor's hands were quickly tapping on the keyboard. At this moment, a teleportation gate suddenly appeared behind him, and Emma came out with a haggard expression. Her hair was stuck together by sweat, and there were even 2 or 3 streaks of blood on her cheek. How is it? The Queen of Heaven is attacking the base with Zhu Rong and Songbang. I sent Xia Likong and Xia Yunyun over to support them, but I'm afraid they won't be able to hold on for long. A hint of nervousness appeared in Emma's eyes. 6th rank, much more powerful than I thought. If it wasn't for His Majesty, the Queen of Heaven alone would be enough to wipe us out. Xia Yunyun? Why did you send her over? Do you want to be eaten by Lianping? Emma waved her hand. She subdued a monster in New Dongyang City. She can help. Forget it. Lianping has already escaped anyway. I'm adjusting the defense formation. I'm afraid it'll take a while. While saying this, the doctor's hands didn't stop moving, and the screen quickly jumped. The other side is very cunning. The gravity coefficient is constantly changing. This will take me a lot of time. I need to change the defense formation from static to dynamic. Then how much longer do you need? The doctor didn't even turn his head. Give me 2 more minutes. 2 minutes? Emma said hatefully. Then I'll go help over there first. No. The doctor stopped Emma and said indifferently, the other side has already found this place. There are about 3 5th rank ability users. Help me block them. Just 2 minutes. 3 5th rank ability users? Emma heard the doctor's words and directly cursed. 3, and he still wanted her to block them for 2 minutes. This wasn't 2 minutes of escaping, but 2 minutes of blocking them. The doctor didn't care about Emma's tone and said calmly, I remember you left coordinates in New Dongyang City, right? Just let those monsters come over. What? Emma hesitated. Those monsters are wild and untamed. If we just let them go, there's no time to hesitate. If you don't rely on those monsters, you won't be able to last more than 2 minutes. The doctor slowly said, those monsters have been trained for so long, and Lianping is in Tianjing City. Nothing will happen. Go to the ground and face the enemy. Fighting here will affect me. Emma nodded helplessly. She turned around and disappeared. When she reappeared, she was already above the center of the formation. This was the place where the parade was supposed to pass, but because of the chaos in the city, the crowd watching the parade had all left. The railings, flags, and other decorations on the side of the street had all fallen to the ground. Emma glanced at it and didn't care about it anymore. She pressed her hands into the air and instantly, a black crack more than 10 meters long appeared in the air. Like a crack in a door, it slowly opened in Emma's hands. This time, Emma's opening of the portal was much slower than usual. This was because the portal from New Dongyang City to Tianjing was opened directly. It was a distance of several thousand kilometers. If Emma hadn't set the coordinates in New Dongyang City in advance, it would be impossible to open such a portal. With such a long distance, the speed at which the teleportation gate was generated was also very slow. Damn it, 3 level 5 ability users, please don't come over at this time. Emma continued to inject psychic energy into the portal and watched the black crack expand centimeter by centimeter. She prayed in her heart that the other party wouldn't come too quickly. However, as the saying goes, good things don't come true, but bad things do. When the 10-meter-tall portal in front of Emma opened more than 10 centimeters, the figures of 3 men slowly appeared in front of her. Demir Tanner looked at Emma and teased, "The thing in this woman's hands is the center of the defense formation? It's really obvious." Beside him were Tai Tan and Solomon. The two of them stood very close to each other and were about 2 to 3 meters away from Tanner. It seemed that they were very worried about this first level 5 ability user in history. Hearing Tanner's words, Tai Tan frowned. As a veteran level 5 ability user in the League of Stars, he had the power to control gravity. He had even led a team to attack Xia Dragonfinch in the past. This time, he was fully in charge of the plan to break through Tianjing's defense formation. It's not her. She's Emma, Xia Dragonfinch's level 5 ability user. Her ability is to open a portal. The center of the defense formation should be underground where she's at right now. Tai Tan said calmly, "I'm afraid he's trying to stop us. The other party is adjusting the defense formation. Once they succeed, the situation will be disadvantageous to us." Solomon immediately stood up. "Don't waste time. Lianping has already escaped. Let's make the best use of our time." After saying this, he lightly blew out a breath of air. A wave of white mist already surged towards Emma's location. That was the ultimate cold air that was countless times colder than liquid nitrogen. Wherever it passed, all molecular movements would come to a complete standstill. The surrounding temperature rapidly dropped. Before the white icy mist even approached Emma, a thick layer of frost had already formed beneath her feet. Such terrifying cold air was just a casual breath of air from Solomon. Emma's mind immediately became highly focused. She understood that the following period of time would be a battle of life and death for her. With a thought from Emma, a black portal directly appeared in front of the cold air. The cold air that surged over directly entered the portal. At the same time, a black portal also opened above Tai Tan and the other two people's heads. The surging cold air directly entered through this portal. Facing the reversed psychic energy, the 3 people present did not move at all. Only Solomon raised his right hand. The originally ferocious cold air immediately turned into a tamed puppy. It gathered into a ball and shrunk into Solomon's hand. Tanner on the side smiled sinisterly. "You can't do it. Let me play with her." After he finished speaking, he flicked his fingers. A series of complicated changes immediately appeared in the surrounding magnetic field. Emma did not know that Tanner directly caused a microwave heating effect. For her, it meant that the temperature at her location rapidly increased in an instant. She screamed in shock. A black spatial fragment had already slashed towards Tai Tan and the other 2 people across the air. This kind of attack was purely caused by the unstable spatial structure. Even adamantium would not be able to withstand his slash. Therefore, even if the combined strength of the 3 of them was much stronger than Emma, they still had to dodge in the face of this attack. Tai Tan waved his hand, and an invisible gravitational force had already grabbed him and Solomon and flew backwards. As for Tanner, he also used a magnetic field to control his body to fly backward. Seeing that his 3 fifth energy rank powerhouses were still forced back by Emma, Tai Tan's eyes flashed with anger. In fact, before Shang Zhenhai appeared, Tai Tan had always considered himself as the future leader of the League of Stars. He believed that apart from the Queen of Heaven, he was the strongest ability user in the entire world. However, he never expected that after Shang Zhenhai appeared, the Queen of Heaven actually placed all of her attention on Shang Zhenhai. Meanwhile, Shang Zhenhai also displayed unprecedented talent, replacing Tai Tan's position and becoming the popular candidate for the next leader of the League of Stars. How could Tai Tan swallow this anger? Then, there was Li Anping, this anomaly, who appeared out of nowhere, suppressing the 4 poles with unimaginable strength. This even made Tai Tan secretly hate and envy him. This kind of continuous psychological disparity always made his heart suffer. He couldn't wait for Li Anping and Shang Zhenhai, these newly emerged 5th rank ability users, to all die out. Now, even Li Anping's subordinate, a woman who was previously unknown, was putting on an appearance as if she was going to fight to the death. Tai Tan's eyes flashed with anger, and the soles of his feet lightly stepped on the ground. Immediately, an invisible force directly surged out from the ground, grabbing towards Emma, who was in front of him. That was the invisible gravitational force from the entire planet, which was instantly magnified 10 times by Tai Tan's ability. Kneel down. Following Tai Tan's explosive shout, the 10 times gravity directly acted on Emma's body. She wasn't an ability user with a strong physique to begin with, so this directly caused damage to her body, especially her internal organs, which suffered huge pressure. She cried out, spitting out a large mouthful of blood towards the ground, and her entire body couldn't help but kneel down on one knee. Countless fragments and cracks also appeared on the ground from the pressure. Seeing that Emma still wanted to force herself to stand up, Tai Tan's eyes flashed with a trace of tyranny. "Did I say to let you stand up?" Following Tai Tan's words, a gravitational force with Emma's arm as the center began to pull, a series of kacha-kacha sounds came from her right arm, as if it was going to be broken in the next moment. At the same time that Emma cried out miserably, she waved one hand, and another spatial fragment slashed towards Tai Tan. However, although this kind of attack's power was great, to destroy the stable structure of space to achieve the attack's effect, its speed was really too slow. Tai Tan took a light step and already dodged this attack. Just as he raised his right hand and was about to deal a fatal blow to Emma, the 10-meter-tall spatial door that Emma had opened suddenly expanded, completely blocking Emma's body. Tai Tan frowned and directly increased the gravitational force output, but there was no reaction at all. If he could go around the spatial gate, he would be able to see the place where Emma had knelt down, leaving behind a black spatial gate on the ground. She had already entered it and transported herself away. Solomon got close to Tai Tan, and his eyes stared at the spatial gate that had suddenly expanded. He said, "There's something wrong with this gate." Tanner nodded as well. "A 10-meter-tall spatial gate. What on earth is she trying to send over first? Who cares what it is? It'll die the moment it comes out." Tai Tan let out a cold snort, and with a raise of his hand, he once again changed the upward gravitational force. At the place where Emma had been standing earlier, countless amounts of cement and soil flew up, and a huge pit was formed in the blink of an eye. It was still getting deeper and deeper, extending toward where the doctor was. "That woman has already escaped. Tanner, come and help. Quickly destroy the defensive formation. Solomon, you'll be on guard." Tai Tan called out a few times but did not hear any reply. He turned his head and saw Tanner staring at the pitch-black spatial gate. "Something's not right," Tanner said. Tai Tan said, "What's wrong? Quickly come and help. It's very important whether the defensive formation is broken or not. I don't wish for Li Anping to be able to leave as he wishes when the fight breaks out." Just as the two of them were speaking, a roar that sounded like a lion's or a tiger's suddenly rang out from the spatial gate. Solomon's countenance changed, and he looked at Titan and said, "Did you hear that?" Tanner smiled. "It sounds like the roar of some animal." Titan opened his mouth, wanting to say something. Suddenly, a huge dragon claw that was over 3 meters thick and covered in countless golden scales reached out from the spatial gate, grabbing fiercely toward Titan with a strong stench. Chapter 325. What the hell is this? Seeing the huge dragon claw coming toward him, Titan's brows twitched. Endless gravity was already acting on the dragon claw, wanting to press the dragon claw down toward the ground. However, it was useless. His ability, which had always been successful, seemed to have lost its effect at this moment. In the end, Titan only managed to use his psychic chi to defend his body before he was sent flying by the dragon claw. Amidst a series of loud bangs, he crashed through 3 buildings and eventually fell to his knees. A hint of blood trickled down from the corners of his lips as he stared in the direction of the teleportation gate. This monster is also able to control gravity? Under Solomon's gaze, 3 huge golden dragon heads struggled to get out from the teleportation gate. Before they had even come out completely, the 3 dragon heads were already bellowing furiously. Sound waves that could be seen by the naked eye gushed out in all directions, as if they were going to flip up the entire street. Earlier on, the tri-headed golden dragon had sent Titan flying with a single slap. As a monster that also possessed the ability to control gravity, it might not be comparable to Titan, who had gone through countless trials and tribulations. However, the amount of gravity it could control far surpassed that of Titan. When the tri-headed golden dragon had crawled out from the teleportation gate, Titan had wiped the corners of his lips in fury. However, when the black dragon crawled out from the teleportation gate, Titan, Solomon, and Tanner already felt that things were a little troublesome. After the black dragon, the fire demon giant appeared. His demon-like destruction caused Solomon to break out in cold sweat. However, this was not the end. What happened next was like entering the mythological era for Titan and the other 2. There was a single-eyed giant, a huge snake that soared into the sky like a flood dragon, a Kirin that was completely covered in flames, and a fox that was several tens of meters tall and had 9 tails that could cover up the sky. There was a total of 10 monsters, and each of them gave Titan a dangerous feeling. After they appeared together, they turned their gazes toward Titan and the other 2. Titan said softly, "Tanner, call for backup." "I'm already doing it." Tanner nodded, and waves of electromagnetic signals were being released from his body. While they were talking, the monster army on the other side moved. The first to make a move was a huge 9-tailed fox. With a roar, an inexplicable fluctuation suddenly appeared in the air. Countless red, blue, and black powers gathered toward his mouth like bubbles. In just a few seconds, a black energy bomb the size of a car was formed. Although Titan and the other 2 did not know the principle behind this black energy bomb, the threat they felt from it still made their scalps tingle. To put it simply, if they were hit by this thing, they would definitely be done for. Therefore, before the 9-tailed fox could spit out the black energy bomb, the 3 of them had already scattered in all directions. The next moment, the energy bomb hit the Titan's previous position at an astonishing speed. There was a loud bang. Following the explosion of the energy bomb, a red ball of light enveloped a radius of several hundred meters. Titan turned his head to look. The entire street had already turned into a huge crater. The energy of unknown principle had directly blown everything into powder. The turbulent air waves formed by the explosion directly blew over his body, causing his clothes to flutter. This was like a signal. After the 9-tailed fox made its move, the other 9-headed monsters could not wait to make their move as well. The huge black dragon soared into the sky, carrying hundreds of thousands of tons of power. It suddenly pounced toward Tanner, who was flying in the air in the distance. The tri-headed golden dragon was like a rampaging tank, but it was tens of thousands of times more ferocious than a tank. It directly charged toward Titan. Wherever it passed, whether it was the streets, cars, or buildings, everything was directly crushed into biscuits by the terrifying gravitational force. The Balrog's body burned with green flames. Before it even got close, the streets and cars on the side were directly melted. The ground that it passed by was all turned into black glue. He started running slowly. Every time his feet landed on the ground, it would cause the surroundings to tremble. He was like a green shooting star, fiercely crashing toward Solomon. In a short period of time, each of the 3 powerful level 5 ability users had to suffer the attacks of 3 or 4 monsters. These monsters not only had astonishing strength and were generally invulnerable, they also each had their own unique abilities. Moreover, they did not have any scruples when fighting. Not only did they cause shocking destruction to the surroundings, but they also completely suppressed Titan and the other 2. This was especially true for Titan. The tri-headed golden dragon had its eyes fixed on him and chased him around like a dog. Titan's ability to control gravity was not even 20% of what he could do. He could only barely control a part of his body's gravity, and then use his 5th energy level psychic force to fight against the monster's encirclement. This damned beast. Ever since Titan reached the 5th level, he had never been chased around like a dog. He looked at the tri-headed golden dragon with eyes filled with endless rage. This beast, I will definitely pull out its tendons and skin it alive later. Suddenly, a red streak of light rolled toward him from the sky. The one who launched the attack this time was a completely red monster. The monster was about 2 to 3 meters tall and stood up like a human. Sections of huge bone spurs grew from its elbows, back, and shoulders. There were also 2 huge, sharp horns on its head. Other than that, the monster also had a long and thick tail, like a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus. It was the demonic monster that Li Anping called Destruction. Streaks of red lightning shot out from the center of his palm and gathered together like a red streak of light. Wherever it passed, everything was decomposed into the most primitive state of molecules. Titan naturally did not know the effect of this attack, but he would never let himself try it out. He gestured with his hand, and over 100 gravitational forces pulled the destructive palm to the side. The red lightning pulses also changed their direction as a result, brushing past the Titan's body and slicing a building several hundred meters away into 2. The building then collapsed toward the ground. However, this delay allowed the tri-headed golden dragon to catch up. It raised its dragon claw and slammed it down on Titan with the help of gravity. Beast! Titan saw the dragon claw coming down and hesitated. Just then, a series of sonic booms were heard in the sky. 12 silver shadows had already rushed toward the monsters. One of the silver lights accelerated and crashed into the tri-headed golden dragon. With a loud boom, the silver light was only the size of a thumb compared to the tri-headed golden dragon. However, the collision caused the tri-headed golden dragon to stagger. The dragon claw that was about to hit Titan also tilted to the side. It crashed into the ground, creating a huge crater that was a few meters deep. Countless cracks appeared on the ground around it. The tri-headed golden dragon cried out in pain after the collision with the silver shadow. A large wound appeared on its back. It could only feel that the thing that hit it was very hard and very sharp. Its sturdy scales were no different from a piece of paper in front of the other party. The tri-headed golden dragon turned its head and saw a 3-meter-tall humanoid body covered in a silver-white metallic glow. Every line and protrusion on the humanoid body gave off a feeling of sturdiness, indestructibility, and indestructibility. The thing that slashed open the tri-headed golden dragon's back was the sharp blade that ejected from the wrist of the humanoid body. The tri-headed golden dragon roared at the mechanical soldiers that came to support the League of Stars and pounced on them. The dragon and the humanoid immediately engaged in a fierce battle. This time, the situation was different from before. The mechanical soldier was not as strong as the tri-headed golden dragon in terms of strength. However, with the adamantium material, It was not afraid of any physical attacks. No matter how the tri-headed golden dragon slapped, bit, or used gravity to squeeze, it had no effect on the mechanical soldier. Instead, the mechanical soldier relied on the sharp blades that ejected from its body to leave wounds on the tri-headed golden dragon from time to time. The situation in other places was similar. Following Tanner's electromagnetic signal, 12 robots made of adamantium broke through the air and directly faced the 10 monsters summoned by Emma. The monsters had an absolute advantage in terms of strength. However, the 12 robots were like cockroaches that could not be killed. No matter what kind of attack they received, they could immediately get up and continue to fight. The black dragon sprinted in the sky and sent a robot flying with a slap. The robot tumbled a dozen times in the air and rushed into a building. It made a series of crashing sounds and rushed out from the other side of the building. It then crashed into a row of houses and disappeared into the ruins. However, within a few seconds, it stood up again from the wreckage. Its entire body looked unscathed, and it rushed toward another monster. On the other side, Nine-Tailed Fox opened his mouth again. Various blue, red, and black bubble-like energies were gathering in his mouth. A total of 5 high-density black energy bombs had been formed. With a burst of air-piercing sounds, they shot toward the robot in front of him. The earth-shattering explosion resounded throughout Tianjing. A huge beam of light soared into the sky and kept spreading in all directions, turning all the man-made objects in the vicinity into pieces in an instant. When the beam of light slowly dissipated, all the buildings had disappeared, leaving behind only a huge pit. The robots were still unscathed. There was not even a dent or scratch on the surface of their bodies. They charged toward the monsters once again. At this moment, Tai Tan and the other two had already distanced themselves from the battlefield between the monsters and the robots. Tai Tan looked at the location where explosions and flashes would occur from time to time and let out a cold snort. These B** stars almost ruined my plans. Solomon asked, "What do we do now?" Tai Tan said resolutely, "We'll dig a passageway from underground. No matter what, we must destroy the defensive array completely." Just then, Tai Tan's countenance suddenly changed. "Damn it! What's the matter?" Solomon asked. Tai Tan's countenance turned grim as he said, "The other party has reactivated the defensive array." "Is that so?" Hearing this news, Tanner laughed. "Then, there's no need for me to maintain the changes in the magnetic field, right? I've been unable to use my full strength to maintain the magnetic field that covers the entire Tianjing. There's no need for that." With this, the magnetic field and gravitational changes in the entire Tianjing stopped at the same time. Everyone suddenly realized that the communication devices that they had been unable to use before could be used again. Tai Tan and Tanner, who had been maintaining these two domains, retracted their abilities at the same time. Boundless power surged in their bodies. Now that they were free from the burden, they were in their true, complete states. At the next moment, the three of them each took out a spiritual gem from their pockets. "Get ready for battle. Since the defensive array has been reactivated, we'll probably be besieged next. Act according to the situation. The plan is the top priority." When Lianping used the Sword of Legacy to slash the arc in the sky into pieces, the professor's voice was transmitted directly into his ears through the defensive array. "Your Majesty, someone changed the gravitational coefficient of the entire Tianjing just now, causing the defensive array to fail. I've reactivated it now." "Very good," Lianping said calmly. "Teleport all the enemies in Tianjing together with me. Destination: Training Ground Number 3. The professor was stunned and asked again, "Your Majesty, you said all of them?" Lianping said coldly, "Do I need to repeat myself?" "No need." The professor immediately replied, "The teleportation has already begun. However, there are 3 level 5 ability users intercepting the army outside the city. They aren't in the defensive array, so I can't teleport them." The corners of Li Anping's lips curled up bit by bit, revealing a cruel smile. It's fine. It's just stepping on some ants, it won't take me too long. Chapter 326. Training Ground Number 3. It was one of the training grounds that Li Anping had built in the deepest part of the old site of Research Institute Number 8 for the convenience of his own training. The entire training ground was made of a special alloy. It was like a huge metal box that enveloped the entire training ground. As for the size of the training ground, it was a square space that was 1 kilometer in length and width. The height was about 10 meters. Just as Li Anping gave the order, a group of blurry figures suddenly lit up in the center of the training ground. In the next moment, more than 10 people appeared in the center of the training ground. These people were divided into 2 groups. The one on the right was a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. In modern terms, she could be called a goddess. There was not a single flaw on her perfect face. If this woman had been born in ancient times, her face alone would have been enough to make everyone fall head over heels for her. Behind the blonde woman were Shang Zhenhai, Tai Tan, Solomon, Tanner, Song Bang, Zhurong, and King Qilin. Among them, Song Bang and Zhurong were still in battle mode. Song Bang held 2 high-frequency swords in each hand, while Zhurong was covered in a layer of flames. As soon as he appeared, the people around him retreated. Solomon frowned and blew a breath of cold air toward where he was sitting, returning the surrounding temperature to its original level. Opposite them, the man in the lead was Li Anping. He held a sword in his right hand, and a black psychic energy clone floated behind him. When Zhurong and Song Bang saw Li Anping, a ferocious look appeared on their faces. Their eyes were filled with resentment and killing intent, as if they were demons from hell. About 10 meters behind Li Anping stood Bai Xinghe, Fang Yuhuang, Emma, Xia Laikong, Xia Yunyun, Jin Guang, and Yan Bei. All of them were injured, especially Xia Laikong. His arms were covered with wounds that were so deep that his bones could be seen. There was even a penetrating wound on his chest. The muscles inside were almost completely carbonized. If it were not for the healing power of life in his 8 dragons' power, he would have been lying on the ground already. It could be seen that the defense of De Xia Long K base was very fierce. In comparison, Xia Yunyun seemed to be in a much better state. However, her current appearance was very different from before. Her entire body was covered in a layer of black clothes. Li Anping's observation, this layer of clothes wrapped around Xia Yunyun like a sticky liquid. It was as if it was alive, continuously absorbing Xia Yunyun's psychic energy. It seemed to be a parasitic creature that absorbed Xia Yunyun's psychic energy to strengthen some of its powers. Why did he teleport them here? Is the doctor a busybody? Li Anping didn't care about Song Bang and the others. He wanted to ask the professor to teleport the people behind him out, but after thinking about it, he ordered, Fang Yuhuang, protect them all. Understood. When Fang Yuhuang finished his sentence, a 1-meter-wide invisible space had already surrounded Bai Xinghe, Emma, Xia Laikong, Xia Yunyun, Jin Guang, and Yan Bei. From now on, anyone who wanted to attack them would have to cross a distance of 33,000 kilometers. It was almost impossible to do that in front of Li Anping. This was also why Li Anping gave up on the idea of teleporting them back to the base. Compared to that, they would be safer under Fang Yuhuang's protection. Li Anping waved the heirloom sword in his hand. He looked at the Queen of Heaven's group as if he was looking at a pile of delicious desserts. He said calmly, Emma, Bai Xinghe, don't do anything unnecessary. These people are all mine. Speaking of this, a faint bloody glow appeared in his eyes. At this time, the doctor's voice rang in his ears again. Your Majesty, there is a level 5 ability user who can transform into lightning and is traveling through the electric circuit. He is too fast and I can't catch him. There is also a guy who can control earth and rock. He is hiding too deep. I can't do anything about it. It's okay, Li Anping said calmly. His eyes were fixed on the Queen of Heaven the whole time. He still remembered the godly state he reached after swallowing the mental gem when he defeated Grey. Therefore, among these ability users, the Queen of Heaven was the one he looked forward to the most. If he could use the heirloom sword in his hand to absorb the Queen of Heaven's 6th level ability, Lianping believed that his strength would reach an even higher peak. The Queen of Heaven was already used to being stared at by others. Whether it was her beauty or her powerful strength, it was guaranteed that no matter where she was, she would be the center of attention. However, Lianping's eyes were different. The Queen of Heaven couldn't feel any admiration from those eyes. There was only naked desire. Lianping's eyes didn't look like he was looking at a person, but more like he was looking at food. Frowning slightly, the Queen of Heaven still didn't immediately make a move. Formless spiritual energy instantly connected to Shang Zhenhai, Titan, Solomon, Tanner and the others' minds. She looked at Lianping and said, "Lianping, I really didn't expect that the weak you back then would reach this level today. You have enough power to dominate the world. To be honest, I have never regretted anything in my life. However, until today, I have one thing that I regret the most in my life, which is that I didn't kill you back then." The Queen of Heaven sighed. "If I had another chance to go back to 2 years ago, I would have personally made a move. I would have mobilized the entire League of Stars' power to kill you at all costs." When the Queen of Heaven said this, killing intent covered the sky and earth. It was as if she would make a move at the next moment. Her spiritual energy field enveloped the entire training ground. Accompanying her words, it was as if countless seas of blood were surging in the air. However, in the next moment, the killing intent disappeared without a trace. The Queen of Heaven changed the topic and said, "With your current strength, you can at most contend against us. Once we fight, both sides might suffer losses, and the Western continent's countries will take advantage of us. Therefore, why don't we work together? With our strength, once we work together, who in the world can stop us? When the time comes, we'll cross the sea and rule. You'll rule your eastern continent, and I'll rule the western continent. What did you say?" Song Bang was the first to jump out. "I definitely won't agree to this. Lianping must die today, and those traitors from Xia Dragonfinch will also go to hell with him." Hearing Song Bang's words, the Queen of Heaven only glanced at him, as if she was transmitting some information into his mind. Song Bang was stunned. In the end, he looked at Lianping unwillingly and retreated without saying another word. "Lianping, think about it carefully. The matter I'm talking about." Before she could finish, Lianping waved his hand, stopping them from continuing. "There's nothing to say." Lianping coldly said, "All of you must die." As he spoke, Lianping's thick murderous aura was like a blade that stuck to the Queen of Heaven's and the others' cheeks. Just as Lianping finished speaking, the psychic energy clone and Lianping moved at the same time. In fact, the reason Lianping didn't make a move immediately after the teleportation was completed was because of one person, Shang Zhenhai. Although Shang Zhenhai's ability wasn't time stop, it had the effect of stopping time. However, due to the time interval, Lianping knew that Shang Zhenhai wouldn't use this ability immediately. He would definitely use it at the most crucial moment. Once he used it, he would probably let his companions attack him continuously to use this ability. However, from Shang Zhenhai's current performance, even if he used the ability passively, it couldn't be stacked within the duration of the ability's duration. To put it simply, after being attacked, he activated an ability similar to Time Stop. However, when Time Stop was weaving the future, the ability wouldn't be activated again after being attacked. In other words, regardless of whether Shang Zhenhai used it passively or actively, there would definitely be a time interval when he activated his ability. However, this was for others. For Shang Zhenhai, no matter who attacked him, it would cause him to become an observer of the entire universe and enter a state of weaving the future. Therefore, Lianping knew that the moment the teleportation was completed would be when the other party was most vigilant and had the fastest reaction. At this time, Lianping made a move. The time interval between the other party's ability activation was too short. Therefore, Lianping didn't make a move immediately. Instead, he chose to wait or create a better opportunity. In fact, ever since Shang Zhenhai appeared, although Lianping's eyes were fixed on the Queen of Heaven, at least half of his attention was on Shang Zhenhai. Shang Zhenhai's heartbeat, breathing, pupils, and every minute movement were all under his observation. Any mistake or emotion on his part could cause Lianping to have an extra 0.1 seconds before he could activate his ability. For the current Lianping, even if it was just 0.1 seconds, it was enough for him to kill back and forth. Therefore, after he finished speaking, the murderous aura that was immersed in the lives of hundreds of millions of people surged out. Shang Zhenhai's pupils contracted slightly, and his heartbeat quickened slightly. A series of information flashed through Lianping's mind like lightning. He knew that the time had come. Shang Zhenhai's talent was indeed very strong, and his ability was also very outstanding. However, he wasn't like Lianping, who was a practical person. He had started killing when his ability was still at level 0 and walked out with a sword and a blade. He was like a flower in a greenhouse that had soared to the heavens under the nurturing of the Queen of Heaven. Therefore, when faced with Lianping's incredible murderous aura, he couldn't help but feel a trace of fear in his heart. There were also some slight fluctuations in his mind. Lianping was able to accurately capture the slight ripple of energy. Almost as soon as Lianping's words reached everyone's ears, the legacy sword in Lianping's hand was already like a bolt of lightning, directly tearing through the atmosphere, crossing a distance of tens of meters, and piercing toward the Queen of Heaven. However, just between the legacy sword and the Queen of Heaven's body, someone who shouldn't have been there appeared. Song Bang, a level 5 expert with the ability of bullet time, was probably the fastest person present apart from Lianping. Even so, according to Lianping's calculations, Song Bang's speed should be completely unable to keep up with his speed. There was no time to think about why Song Bang's speed had increased, and Lianping didn't need to think about why Song Bang's speed was faster than before. This was because in front of Lianping, Song Bang's obstruction was meaningless. Lianping's figure didn't change at all, and even the direction of the legacy sword didn't change at all. Song Bang in front of him was like a ball of air to him. Lianping directly collided with Song Bang as if he was stepping over a ball of air. Song Bang's entire body was directly smashed into countless pieces, like a watermelon falling from the 50th floor to the ground, exploding in all directions. Lianping, who had stepped over Song Bang, acted as if nothing had happened. The legacy sword in his hand carried a power that could pierce through everything and ruthlessly pierce toward the Queen of Heaven's chest. Chapter 327. There was a loud boom. With the Sword of Legacy as the epicenter, the explosive airflow spread in all directions of the training ground. Lianping's stab with the legacy landed on Heaven Queen's chest without any fancy moves. A power that was countless times stronger than a flash flood traveled along Lianping's arm from the legacy to Heaven Queen's chest. Then, it spread out from her chest to Heaven Queen's entire body. In less than 0.01 seconds, Heaven Queen's entire body shattered, turning into countless fragments that shot out in all directions. However, Lianping, who had witnessed this scene, didn't look pleased at all. This was because he hadn't intended to make Heaven Queen explode with this stab. Instead, he had wanted to pierce through her and absorb her abilities. Rather than saying that Lianping had exploded Heaven Queen's body, it was more accurate to say that Heaven Queen's body had decomposed by itself. There was no blood or flesh in the exploded body. Heaven Queen's body had turned into an almost transparent flowing substance. It was a bit like a jellyfish in the sea. It scattered into hundreds of pieces that floated to every corner of the training ground. Joy, fear, excitement, nervousness, Li Anping could feel the various spiritual waves emitted by these lumps of substance. This was because the spiritual waves emitted by the other party were so strong that even ordinary people could feel them. The air didn't vibrate, but Li Anping could hear Heaven Queen's voice. It was a message that she had transmitted through her mind. Li Anping. Heaven Queen's voice was filled with madness and anger. You're courting death. However, the anger she transmitted had no effect on Li Anping. Before he understood Heaven Queen's situation, Li Anping had temporarily given up on her and switched to the next target. At the same time, the moment before Li Anping exploded Heaven Queen's body, the psychic clone on the other side also pointed a finger at Solomon's head. The interior of Solomon's body and the exterior of his body were two distinct worlds. The interior of his body had always maintained an ultra-low temperature of -200°C. Once he received any form of attack that broke through his skin, he would instantly stop the attack by stopping the movement of molecules. However, the finger of the psychic energy incarnation did not explode his head. Instead, it enveloped Solomon's entire body with a field of nothingness and crushed him into a ball of flesh the size of a thumb. In the next moment, the psychic energy incarnation appeared in front of Tai Tan in a flash and pointed at him again. However, this time, the Nian energy body encountered a huge resistance. The Titan's body had completely recovered after putting down the huge burden of changing Tianjing's gravitational coefficient. At this moment, he was like a huge and stable gravitational field. The gravitational force between the countless planets and matter was magnified countless times, but they also cancelled each other out, reaching a state of relative balance. Under such circumstances, once a powerful external force attempted to exert itself on him, it would instantly break the balance and cause him to suffer a backlash. This was the situation that the psychic energy incarnation was currently facing. The field of nothingness instantly broke the balance of the gravitational field in Tai Tan's body. A force that was enough to destroy an entire city erupted in an instant, almost pushing back the field of nothingness. If Emma had encountered Tai Tan in his complete state earlier, she might have lost her life in a single blow. However, this kind of force that had erupted instinctively before Tai Tan could react and lacked the guidance of his consciousness was not enough in front of the current Li Anping. The field of nothingness contracted and tens of millions of tons of force erupted at the same time. The gravitational field in Tai Tan's body did not even have the slightest bit of resistance. The field of nothingness instantly pressed him into a meatball. Li Anping and the psychic energy incarnation at the side passed by each other and stuffed two meatballs into their mouth. Then, they charged toward Tanner and Zhurong respectively. At this point, only a moment had passed since Li Anping had launched his attack. Other than Song Bang and the Heavenly Queen who had reacted, the others were completely frozen in time for Li Anping. Originally, Li Anping had estimated that he could kill another 1 or 2 people. However, if Song Bang's appearance was the first surprise, the Heavenly Queen's transformation was the second, and the Heavenly Queen's subsequent reaction was the third surprise. The Heavenly Queen's spiritual force field could connect the consciousness of different people through spiritual connection. This was also the first thing she did after the teleportation ended. Under the condition of spiritual connection, the Heavenly Queen, Shang Zhenhai, Tai Tan, Solomon, and the others could communicate through pure consciousness without any hindrance. In the past, when they relied on human vocal cords to communicate word by word, the efficiency was equivalent to 10 kilobytes of internet speed. However, after the spiritual connection, the transmission speed of information had reached hundreds of megabytes per second. Therefore, the Heavenly Queen's gaze was enough to make Song Bang retreat. This was because she had told Song Bang through the spiritual connection that his true goal was to stall for time and wait for Lei Di to arrive. Unfortunately, Li Anping did not give them much time. However, The spiritual connection did not only allow the Heavenly Queen and the others to communicate at high speed without any hindrance, it also transmitted the world that the Heavenly Queen was observing through her spiritual force field into their brains. It even took over their nervous systems and directly controlled their physical bodies through their spiritual force. Under such circumstances, their reaction speed and thinking speed were increased countless times. Therefore, Song Bang was able to surpass the original speed bottleneck and was the first to react. He took a step forward and stood in front of the Heavenly Queen. Even if this was his limit, even if this was meaningless to Lianping. As for the others, although they reacted at the same time as Song Bang through their spiritual force field, their physical bodies could not keep up with their reactions. They were also unable to effectively defend or counterattack. Only one person, Shang Zhenhai, did not need to make any specific movements to change the situation of the battle. When he took the initiative to activate the unchangeable world, the entire world began to stop. Shang Zhenhai raised his head and looked. Lianping and his psychic avatar both stopped moving in the air. The Heavenly Queen herself had already disappeared. Instead, she had become countless spiritual bodies scattered throughout the space. Song Bang was still standing in front of the Heavenly Queen. Whether it was the effect of the undying time river or the undying body of the Yellow Springs Kingdom, the shattering of his body was only a matter of an instant to him. Now, he was completely unharmed. King Qilin and Tanner both retreated at the same time. Under the acceleration of the electric current and magnetic field, their speed was indeed faster than the other level 5 ability users. As for Zhurong, his body did not move at all. Only a string of flames was about to shoot out from his pores. In the still world, Shang Zhenhai slowly let out a breath. Then, he walked towards one of the Heavenly Queen's spiritual bodies and touched it with his hand. The instant Shang Zhenhai's right hand touched the spiritual body, all of the spiritual bodies in the space trembled at the same time. They quickly gathered in Shang Zhenhai's direction. Like a ball of mercury, they continuously changed shape and gathered together. In the end, they once again merged into one, reforming the Heavenly Queen's image. The Heavenly Queen held Shang Zhenhai's hand. She glanced at Lianping with lingering fear. She said calmly, "It's completely as we expected. This battle has already become a turn-based one." The Heavenly Queen was right. This battle between Lianping and them had now become a turn-based one. When Lianping moved at full speed, they were no different from static to Lianping. And when Shang Zhenhai's ability was activated, Lianping became a static existence to them. If they wanted to win, it would depend on who could kill the opponent in their own round. In this still world, the Heavenly Queen and Shang Zhenhai walked towards Zhurong first. Shang Zhenhai pressed a palm on Zhurong's shoulder. Zhurong's body moved. Endless flames were about to shoot out from the surface of his body. However, as the spiritual energy field transmitted countless information into his mind, he paused and retracted all of his flames. "Very good. As long as I can kill Lianping, I'll do whatever you want." A hint of savagery appeared on Zhurong's face. Then, under the accompaniment of Shang Zhenhai and the Heavenly Queen, he arrived between Lianping and the Psychic Energy Incarnation. Because the Psychic Energy Incarnation and Lianping had charged towards the Heavenly Queen and the others together, they were very close to each other. Zhurong stood between the two of them, about 2 meters away from each of them. In his body, there seemed to be a violent force rushing left and right, trying to rush out of his body. His eyes, ears, nose, and mouth all had traces of flames coming out. Even the surface of his body began to crack, and from the cracks, there seemed to be a magma-like substance flowing out. The next moment, Shang Zhenhai's hand left Zhurong's shoulder. Zhurong became still again. Then, the Heavenly Queen and Shang Zhenhai found Demir Tanner. He did not have any extreme reaction. Instead, he chuckled through the spiritual connection. "Has it started? I'm really looking forward to it. Will Lianping survive or will we die?" He walked to the side and started to activate his power. An invisible magnetic field was like a sphere, wrapping Li Anping, the psychic energy incarnation, and Zhurong together. A strong electromagnetic force surged in the air. However, this was only the beginning. Because the past could not be affected in the unchangeable world, more power was gathered in Tanner's hands. His hands were almost covered in a dazzling electric light. When he gathered his power to the peak, Shang Zhenhai's hand left his shoulder. It's a pity that Lady didn't make it in time. The Heavenly Queen shook her head. There's no time to wait for him. Originally, after I completed the psychic energy incarnation, I thought that physical attacks would be useless against me. However, Li Anping's power is too strong. Even if my body only has a trace of physical properties, I can't let him continue attacking me like this. At this point, her palms began to emit traces of blue light from her forehead. The true power of the 6th energy level was about to burst out. Chapter 328. The Queen of Heaven's ability was called Spiritual Force Field. It was an ability to use spiritual force to observe and interfere with the material world. When her spiritual force field reached the 6th level, she had already completed the spiritual transformation of her body. Li Anping's Hell's map was to allow his body to have spiritual attributes, breaking through the limits of normal laws of physics, developing unimaginable strength, speed, adaptability, and other abilities. Then the Queen of Heaven's spiritual transformation was an extension of her ability, gradually turning her body into a spiritual body to reduce the physical nature of her body. The benefit of this was that basically all physical attacks would not even have 1% of the effect on her body. Her body could be turned into a spiritual body, and could be cut, reconstructed, or even heated or frozen at will. The disadvantage was that the body would lose many physical properties, causing the Queen of Heaven's body's ability to interfere with the material world to gradually decrease. This way, if she wanted to interfere with the real world, she would have to rely more on her spiritual force field. This was actually the direction that humans chose to evolve after reaching the 6th level, whether to choose the body or the spirit. After her spiritual force field reached the 6th level, the Queen of Heaven finally began to come into contact with the ultimate mystery of humans, the soul. Different from some abilities that she knew but didn't know why, she could carefully observe the existence of the soul. For example, right now in Li Anping's mouth, Solomon and Titan's souls were flying towards Li Anping's brain. Another example was the resurrected Song Bang, Zhurong, and King Qilin. They didn't have souls at all. Even they didn't know that they were puppets made from the elements of the earth under their feet. It was only through the planet's memories that they recalled the abilities and memories of those rank 5 ability users. Unless the entire planet was destroyed, or the ability's duration was up, they wouldn't disappear. After reaching the 6th level, the Queen of Heaven's perspective of the world became different. She could carefully observe souls and energy. Many strange abilities were no longer a secret in front of her. As long as that soul agreed, she could even do what she was doing now. As the blue light on the Queen of Heaven's forehead became brighter and brighter, Solomon and Titan's souls were directly pulled out from Li Anping's body. They were like evil spirits that crawled out from hell, slowly being sucked out of Li Anping's mouth by the Queen of Heaven's spiritual force field. Their souls had already been absorbed by Li Anping. However, Li Anping's ability to absorb souls to strengthen himself had only reached the 5th level of energy. Although his fighting strength had already far exceeded the 5th level due to the continuous strengthening of his body, his ability to absorb souls, which was his true ability, was only at the 5th level. Therefore, when it came to the same effect on the soul, his ability was far inferior to the Queen of Heaven, who had reached the 6th energy rank. With a so sound, their souls entered the Queen of Heaven's forehead, which was her sea of consciousness. This was a new ability that the Queen of Heaven had developed after reaching the 6th energy rank. It was called Home of the Gods, and with the other party's consent, she could store the soul of a person who had just died in her sea of consciousness. Within 3 days, if these souls could not find a suitable new body, they would gradually decay, wither, and then truly die. Within these 3 days, the Heavenly Empress could temporarily borrow the other party's ability depending on the type of ability the soul possessed. For example, the bloodline, mutation, parasitic, and some ancient types could not be borrowed. However, Solomon and Titan belonged to the domain type, so they were still within the scope of being borrowed. If they won this battle, the Queen of Heaven would also put their souls into a spare body and revive them. As the 2 souls were absorbed and sealed by the Queen of Heaven's home of the gods, the Queen of Heaven flipped her hands and used Titan's and Solomon's abilities at the same time. With the help of the 6th energy rank spiritual force field, she was even more familiar with Solomon and Titan's abilities than them. Solomon's cold air, its essence was to reduce the intensity of the movement of molecules to achieve the effect of lowering the temperature. In the Queen of Heaven's hands, not only could she reduce the temperature, she could even increase the intensity of the movement of molecules to increase the temperature. Gravity manipulation was the same. Titan could only do it on his own body, but the Queen of Heaven could do it anywhere she wanted. With Li Anping and his spiritual force as the center, countless objects, planets, and all kinds of gravitational forces changed and increased under the Queen of Heaven's control until they reached a limit. Everything was going according to plan. At the same time, a cluster of blue sparks lit up on the Queen of Heaven's finger. It was a flame that burned with spiritual force, and the flame was only a centimeter away from Shang Zhenhai's forehead. Once something happened, the Queen of Heaven would use this flame to attack Shang Zhenhai's body, triggering his passive ability, Inviolable Boundary, to activate. Everything was ready, and she sent a message to Shang Zhenhai through the spiritual connection. Okay, let's begin. The Queen of Heaven slowly let go of Shang Zhenhai's hand, and her whole body became still again. Shang Zhenhai looked at Li Anping, and a strong killing intent flashed in his eyes. Then, let's begin. The next moment, the whole world came alive again. After a long period of accumulation, the super-strong gravitational force immediately acted on Li Anping and his spiritual force incarnation. Then, Zhurong's body suddenly exploded like a volcano. This was a self-destructive attack using his ability. Under the enhancement of the flamethrower ability, more than 12,000 degrees of flame turned into a huge fireball, directly enveloping Li Anping's body. In addition to Tanner and Solomon's abilities, an ultra-high temperature and ultra-high pressure environment was born. However, because of the magnetic field and the degree to which Solomon controlled the movement of the molecules, no particles or high temperature spread beyond the range of the fireball. At this moment, the spiritual connection connected the consciousness of the League of Stars members. Under the Queen of Heaven's unified command, everyone's abilities formed a perfect combination. With the effect of the spiritual force field, the effects of the abilities were greatly enhanced. The magnetic field controlled by Tanner, the high temperature created by Solomon and Zhurong, and the high pressure created by the Titan almost turned the fireball enveloping Li Anping into a small sun. Li Anping had once used his level 5 spiritual force field and his own nihility force field to create a nuclear fusion reaction. Now, under the coordination of the Queen of Heaven, the League of Stars directly recreated the thermonuclear reaction inside the sun in the training room. They cooperated with each other and continued to increase the pressure and temperature inside the small sun rapidly. Then, it would start to expand due to the continuous increase in heat. In the end, it would even go out of control and undergo helium fusion. Although the scale would be small, the huge power released would definitely be able to destroy the whole of Tianjing. If they were unlucky, 1/3 of Xia would be destroyed. As for whether it would eventually collapse or even create something like a white dwarf, it was no longer within the consideration of the League of Stars. As long as they could kill Li Anping, even if more than 90% of the people on the planet died, the League of Stars would not hesitate. This was the plan formulated by the League of Stars. Through Shang Zhenhai's ability, various abilities were perfectly arranged to display various killing moves to kill Li Anping. Now, the simulated internal reaction of the sun was just one of the preparations. The specific plan to use would depend on the situation at the time, such as the number of people and the ability users. In the eyes of the League of Stars, Li Anping's figure was completely out of sight. Because of the light, they had to close their eyes and observe the situation inside purely with the mental force field. But soon, the temperature and pressure inside the small sun had reached the point where it was difficult for the mental force field to scan. Every time she used her mental force to probe inside, the Queen of Heaven felt as if her consciousness was being ignited. "He's dead." Song Bang looked at the huge fireball with a diameter of about 5 meters with a happy face. His heart was filled with the satisfaction of revenge. Beside him was the equally excited King Qilin. Li Anping was like an insurmountable mountain. Now, the top of this mountain was finally going to be climbed by them. This feeling could no longer be described as just excitement, satisfaction, or carefree. Tanner, the Queen of Heaven, Shang Zhenhai, and the others basically had the same feeling. It was as if a huge stone had been lifted from their hearts. The satisfaction and sense of accomplishment they now felt was similar to the feeling of a person who had finally defeated the final boss in a game, but hundreds of times more intense. After all, before they came, they were prepared to sacrifice their lives. Now that the boss had finally been defeated, how could they not be excited and excited? And inside the small sun, Li Anping's body was constantly collapsing and being reborn. A total of hundreds of millions of souls were constantly being consumed. Almost every second, tens of thousands of souls were used to regenerate his body. But he didn't feel nervous or panicked at all. Instead, he felt a long-lost excitement. Previously, the doctor had asked Li Anping if he really wanted to teleport all of them together. Because in the doctor's opinion, it would be safer to teleport them to Li Anping one by one and let Li Anping kill them. But Li Anping didn't adopt this relatively conservative method. There was only one reason for this, and that was that he was strong enough. He was so strong that even if he faced all the enemy forces invading this time at the same time, he could kill them all and turn them into ashes. He was so strong that whether they were teleported one by one or all of them at the same time, it made no difference to him. In fact, because Tianjing's defensive formation had been destroyed from the very beginning, Li Anping had not used more than 20% of his power up until now. He was worried that Tianjing would suffer irreparable damage because of the aftermath of his attack. Other than the underworld and the destruction of the Ark, he had not used more than 20% of his power. One had to know that a year ago, he could rely on his own strength to blow up Mount Fuji and destroy all the buildings on the surface of Kyoto. After more than a year of cultivation, Li Anping's strength, speed, and stamina had increased by nearly 10 points, not to mention the leaps in other skills. In that case, to what extent had his strength reached? Where was his limit? Even Li Anping himself couldn't estimate it. In the eyes of the people in the League of Stars, the battle with Li Anping would be a turn-based game with each killer move. But in Li Anping's eyes, there was no such thing as a turn-based game or a killer move. The so-called combat power of the other party was just a group of lambs waiting to be slaughtered and dessert after a meal. It seems that my previous judgment was wrong. It's a little troublesome to kill them with only 20% of my strength. In this case, the aftermath caused by 50% of my strength should be able to be transferred by the current defense array without having too much impact on Tianjing. Chapter 329. When they saw that Li Anping and his psychic incarnation were completely engulfed by the fireball, everyone who was protected by the 33 paradises had different reactions. Xia Yunyun was the first to show a worried expression. Even through the protection of the 33 paradises, she could still feel the horror of the death zone created by the League of Stars. She said anxiously, "Grandpa? Is this really okay?" After that, without waiting for Xiao Yekong's reply, she turned to look at Emma, Bai Xinghe, and Fang Yuhuang. She said, "My three lords, how is Brother Li now? Let's go help him. At least we can't let the League of Stars gang up on him like this." Fang Yuhuang and Emma didn't say anything. Although they were both level 5 ability users, the battle just now, whether it was Li Anping's high-speed combo or Shang Zhenhai's ability activation, almost the entire battle was compressed into less than a second. In their eyes, a few figures flashed, and then Solomon, Tai Tan, and Zhurong all disappeared. Li Anping and his psychic incarnation were engulfed by a huge fireball that looked like the sun. Just by looking at the dazzling light emitted by the fireball, one could feel the high temperature contained within it. Although they believed in Li Anping's strength, a few seconds had already passed, and Li Anping, who was trapped by the fireball, didn't show any signs of escaping. It almost made people wonder if he had already turned into ashes. And not everyone on the other side was besieging Li Anping. Song Bang and King Qilin stood at the periphery of the 33 paradises together, looking at everyone in the defensive circle with a malicious gaze. Song Bang even made a throat-slitting gesture at Xiao Laikong, and then laughed evilly. In the distance, the Queen of Heaven, who was activating her ability, and Shang Zhenhai, who was beside her, also glanced at everyone with cold eyes. The threat in their eyes was too obvious. Xiao Laikong also frowned. He struggled to stand up with his heavily injured body and said, "This can't go on. The opponent's ability coordination is perfect. If we don't do anything, Li Anping will be completely trapped." He looked at the Queen of Heaven in the distance and said in a low voice, "I'll use the 8-dragon doppelganger to stall Song Bang. King Qilin will harass the Queen of Heaven. You guys think of a way to save Li Anping." In other words, he had already decided to sacrifice himself, because for him, what was in front of him was the survival of the Xia. Although he did not know whether Li Anping's method of ruling Great Xia was right or wrong, he would not allow the people from the Star Alliance to destroy the stability of Great Xia. But in response to his words, Bai Xinghe just smiled and said, "It's fine. You guys just watch." Among the level 5 ability users on Xia Dragonfinch's side, Bai Xinghe was without a doubt the strongest one. And because he had studied the Sword of Tatsuka and secret martial arts with Li Anping in New Dongyang City, he was also the one who understood Li Anping's strength the most. Right after Li Anping finished his sentence, Li Anping, who was in the high-temperature and high-pressure environment of the fireball, trembled violently. The invisible force field on the surface of his body unleashed infinite strength to the surroundings crazily. Since the beginning of the battle, Li Anping didn't dare to use more than 20% of his strength because of the failure of the defense array. He even had to carefully control his every movement. With his current combat ability, a normal attack might cause irreparable damage to the whole of Tianjing. It might even cause a lot of casualties on Xia's side. Therefore, when he was fighting, he felt that he was fighting with kindergartners. He had to be careful all the time. But right now, as the defense array was activated again, he could finally release part of his strength. The bellow seemed to have split the sky and the earth. A terrifying force was unleashed from the invisible force field. Infinite blast waves burst out and radiated in all directions with Li Anping's body as the center. The small sun with a diameter of 5 meters collapsed from the inside out like a candle that had been blown out by a puff of air. Gravity, high temperature, and magnetic field were all disintegrated by the despairing force that was like an asteroid crashing into the ground. The blast waves from the invisible force field on the surface of Li Anping's body were still surging in all directions after shattering the fireball. If there were no accidents, this round of blast waves would directly smash the League of Stars players into a pile of minced meat. They would be swatted to death like flies on the training room's special alloy walls and floor. The metal walls made of alloy would also be torn apart and destroyed because they couldn't withstand the power of the blast wave. However, before all of this happened, Lianping took the initiative to do something else before the blast waves hit. The moment the small sun collapsed, the Queen of Heaven's finger pointed in Shang Zhenhai's direction. She wanted to take the initiative again by stimulating Shang Zhenhai's passive ability. However, in front of Lianping's extreme speed, the Queen of Heaven's finger seemed to have been slowed down by 100 times. She could only move forward micrometer by micrometer, as if she would never be able to touch Shang Zhenhai. In this world that was almost frozen, Lianping first dispersed the blast waves toward Shang Zhenhai with his palm to prevent them from activating his ability again. Then, as Lianping exerted his strength, the legacy was like a bolt of lightning that pierced through the darkness, flashing past everyone's eyes. Wherever the sword light passed, the atmosphere was split into two. Just the sword energy waves that were produced when it streaked across the air would tear the entire training room in half. Meanwhile, the legacy had already crossed the distance between them with Lianping's right hand and pierced through the Queen of Heaven's chest. However, the Queen of Heaven's body had already completed spiritual transformation. Although the legacy had pierced through her, it was like piercing through jelly and didn't cause any fatal damage. However, this was enough for Lianping. The legacy pierced through the Queen of Heaven's body, and Lianping's left hand grabbed the Queen of Heaven's right hand that was pointing at Shang Zhenhai. Then, the Queen of Heaven's entire body was pushed by Lianping, moving backward at high speed. With a final boom, the Queen of Heaven's body was pushed against a metal wall that was several hundred meters away. If Lianping hadn't controlled his strength, the two of them would have smashed through the alloy wall and gone deep underground. Even so, the metal wall started to shatter under the impact, and a huge crater appeared behind the Queen of Heaven. Countless cracks started to spread from the Queen of Heaven's location, spreading out several hundred meters. The Queen of Heaven's body started to tremble violently, as if she was going to disintegrate in the next moment. Lianping naturally wouldn't let her escape so easily. He covered the surface of the Queen of Heaven's body with his virtual force field, wrapping her up completely. The Queen of Heaven's body didn't have much physical attributes left. Ordinary sword slashes, sword stabs, penetrating wounds, and explosion wounds were nothing to her. To ordinary people, she was a monster with 99.9% physical damage reduction. However, to Lianping, as long as the Queen of Heaven's physical damage reduction didn't reach 100%, she wouldn't be able to escape from the virtual force field. Therefore, the Queen of Heaven could only be pierced through the chest by Lianping, and she was completely pressed against the wall. After being completely suppressed by a man's aggressiveness, the Queen of Heaven finally reacted from the series of attacks. Her eyes were filled with killing intent, and boundless spiritual power condensed in her eyes, releasing streams of blue light. Her golden hair fluttered, and the Queen of Heaven was like a lioness, baring her fangs and brandishing her claws at Lianping. Spiritual storm, spiritual lash, spiritual blast, spiritual pierce, psychological suggestion. All sorts of spiritual power skills were unleashed at Lianping like a torrential storm. However, it was like throwing a stone into the sea, causing no reaction at all. If the Queen of Heaven's spiritual power was said to be an ocean, then after she attacked Lianping's consciousness, she realized that his spiritual world was as vast as the universe. Almost all of her spiritual attacks had no effect at all. Everything happened in an instant. It was only when the Queen of Heaven looked at Lianping in disbelief that the shock wave that had burst the small sun swept past everyone and struck the surrounding metal walls. Rumble, rumble, rumble. A series of explosive sounds rang out, and all the special alloys on the walls and floor twisted and shattered at the same time. If no one stopped such a terrifying explosion underground, the entire city of Tianjing would suffer an unprecedented earthquake, causing countless deaths and injuries. In comparison, the sword chi waves produced by the Sword of Legacy slashed through the air only left behind 2 sword marks that were tens of meters deep on the ceiling and floor. The destructive power to Tianjing was much weaker. However, the power brought about by the shock wave did not continue to wreak havoc. Instead, it was sent out by the defensive formation. In the sky above Tianjing City, thunderous booms rang out one after another. The clouds were instantly swept away by a tyrannical force, forming a cloudless scene for thousands of miles. The professor's frantic shout rang out in Lianping's ears. "Your Majesty, you've reached your limit. Please don't use any more power that exceeds this level. Otherwise, the defensive formation won't be able to send out any excess power." "Got it," Lianping replied casually. His gaze was still fixed on the Queen of Heaven, who was no longer able to resist. She was like a small beast baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, powerlessly resisting his suppression. At this moment, the Sword of Legacy in Lianping's hand lit up with streams of silver light. It finally started to move slowly, sucking out traces of psychic energy from the Queen of Heaven's body. The Queen of Heaven screamed crazily. Countless amounts of cold air and gravity were directly used on Lianping's body. However, the cold air was directly blown away by Lianping's breath. When the gravity acted on Lianping's body, it was like an ant trying to shake a tree. It had no effect at all. Feeling the psychic energy in her body being sucked out faster and faster, the Queen of Heaven finally let out an earth-shattering scream. Her eyes were filled with inconceivable madness as she stared fixedly at Lianping. As her blonde hair fluttered, her originally flawless face looked like a female ghost who had been raped. She did not believe it. She did not believe that as the only human with a 6th energy level, as the leader of the strongest ability user organization, the League of Stars, she would be so easily defeated by Lianping. She did not believe that her strength was actually so much weaker than Lianping's. She did not even last a few seconds. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it." It was accompanied by the Queen of Heaven's shrill scream. The spiritual power turned into streaks of blue lightning in the real world, forming a spiritual storm that completely enveloped Lianping and her. On the other side, Song Bang and King Qilin were directly blown away by the shockwave. They crashed into the metal wall, especially King Qilin, who was smashed into a pile of mush. He had just stood up and was about to charge at Lianping. Zhurong recovered from the self-destruction. Flames shot out from the surface of his body, and he was about to attack Lianping again. Meanwhile, Tanner withstood the shockwave head-on. Shang Zhenhai was not attacked at all. They were all going to support the Queen of Heaven. At this moment, in front of Lianping's overwhelming strength, everyone's eyes were filled with madness and despair. If they did not fight, they would definitely die. Chapter 330. At this moment, Lianping's vision was completely covered by the blue mental storm. These blue lightning bolts that were formed from the Queen of Heaven's mental power had extremely powerful offensive power. It could be said that they were the manifestation of the Queen of Heaven's core consciousness. They had both mental and physical offensive power. As soon as they appeared, they turned the special alloy around them into powder. However, the blue lightning bolts were like little snakes slithering around Lianping's body. They couldn't do any damage to him. The Legacy's light grew brighter and brighter. The psychic energy in the Queen of Heaven's body surged towards the Legacy like a river. As the psychic energy was absorbed faster and faster, the Queen of Heaven's resistance became more and more intense. The lightning storm formed from mental energy had almost turned into a dazzling ball of light, surrounding Lianping and the Heavenly Queen, completely drowning them. Countless densely packed little lightning snakes slithered around the two of them, destroying almost everything except for Lianping. However, in the face of the uninjured Lianping, a man who was as strong as a demon god, the Queen of Heaven, who had no ability to resist, gradually showed traces of despair in her eyes. On the other side, Song Bang and the others, who had rushed over to help, saw a pitch-black figure with black smoke billowing out of it. It was Li Anping's psychic energy incarnation. Facing the psychic energy incarnation before them, Song Bang, Zhurong, and King Qilin, who were the least afraid of death and had the deepest grudges with Li Anping, made the first move. Li Anping, with me here, don't even think about it. With a furious bellow, Song Bang had already flashed behind the psychic energy incarnation at an astonishing speed. The two high-frequency blades in his hands had long been shattered into pieces by the shockwaves earlier. Right now, he could only use his hands as blades, slashing fiercely toward the psychic energy incarnation's neck. However, facing Song Bang's attack, the psychic energy incarnation only growled, "Scram!" A visible sound wave came from the psychic energy incarnation's mouth and spread out. Song Bang, who had rushed behind the psychic energy incarnation, was the first to bear the brunt of the sound wave. Song Bang, who was hit by the sound wave, felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The next moment, it was as if he had really listened to Li Anping's words and was sent flying. His body was constantly pushed by a huge force. As he tumbled in the air, he kept crashing into the training room's wall. Because of the Time River immortal body, he wasn't really injured. However, he couldn't resist the power of Li Anping's roar. He slammed into the wall like a pile of mud, creating a bottomless hole in the wall. His entire body was knocked down several meters into the ground. On the other hand, King Qilin saw that the psychic energy incarnation had sent Song Bang deep into the ground without even moving. He couldn't help but gasp. Even though he knew that he was immortal, he couldn't help but pause for a moment. He couldn't bring himself to yell out the harsh words he wanted to say. After all, he had grown up in the palace and lived a life of luxury. In the past, it was fine to bully aptitude users who were of a lower level than him. However, when faced with a life-and-death battle like this, especially when Li Anping had shown that he was stronger than before and had the ability to make a level 5 master despair, his subconscious reaction revealed a flaw. Just as he paused for a moment, the psychic energy incarnation flashed and appeared in front of him. King Qilin, who was shrouded in the shadow of the psychic energy incarnation, felt like a lamb being targeted by a lion. Streaks of electricity appeared on his body. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something. However, Li Anping didn't give him a chance. The psychic energy incarnation grabbed his head and lifted him up. King Qilin recalled the tragic situation of Solomon and Tai Tan. The two of them were crushed into meatballs by Li Anping and eaten. Looking at the psychic energy incarnation in front of him, King Qilin let out a desperate cry. It was like the last cry of a beast before death. "Li Anping, I'm going to kill you." King Qilin's hands carried streaks of electricity as he smashed the chest of the psychic energy incarnation with all his might. However, before he could complete his last roar or attack, he was compressed into a meatball by the terrifying pressure and kept in the body of the psychic energy incarnation. A silvery white meatball went from the palm of the psychic energy incarnation into his arm. Then, it was covered by layers of force fields and couldn't move at all. Seeing that the Queen of Heaven was in danger and Song Bang and King Qilin were easily dealt with, Demir Tanner's heart tightened. He already had the intention to retreat. This guy's strength is not something that humans can fight against. I'll just be courting death if I stay. It's better to leave first. He soared into the sky, and the metal ceiling of the training room automatically separated under his control, turning into two drills that drilled upward. As for Shang Zhenhai and Zhurong, Shang Zhenhai ignored everything and ran toward the Queen of Heaven. It was as if he wasn't worried that Li Anping would attack him. Meanwhile, Zhurong's body had turned into a huge fireball and was flying toward the psychic energy incarnation. Seeing that Shang Zhenhai was running toward the Queen of Heaven, the psychic energy incarnation didn't attack him. Instead, he looked at Zhurong, who was launching a suicide attack. Facing the huge fireball that was coming toward him, the psychic energy incarnation opened his mouth and blew out a breath. What was the meaning of using breath to form a sword? What Li Anping was doing now was using breath to form a sword. When an ordinary person blew out a breath, the air flow produced was only enough to blow out a candle. However, the breath that the psychic energy incarnation exhaled was more than 1,000 times more violent than an ordinary person's breath. It was as if a white laser had been shot out from the psychic energy incarnation's mouth and slashed toward the huge fireball in the air. The huge fireball that Zhurong had formed by blowing out flames and exploding his body was slashed into two by the white light. Then, the flames that were burning on his body were also extinguished by Li Anping's violent breath. In the completely extinguished fireball, Zhurong's body appeared again. However, his entire body had been sliced into two by Li Anping's breath and fell to the ground with a thud. Then, a meatball the size of a thumb appeared in the psychic energy incarnation's arm. It was also enveloped by layers of force fields. As they hadn't been reborn and didn't have a brain, Zhurong and the others who had turned into meatballs couldn't even feel their own consciousness. On the other side, Tanner had already dug out a long tunnel and was escaping toward the surface. After running for a while, Shang Zhenhai finally arrived in front of the Queen of Heaven. Then, without saying a word, he wanted to rush into the spiritual storm. Obviously, the cooldown time of his ability wasn't up yet and he wanted to activate his ability passively. Seeing what Shang Zhenhai was doing, Li Anping's lips curled up slightly and revealed a strange smile. Chapter 331. Li Anping roughly guessed that Shang Zhenhai's ability was a type of ability similar to time stop. Moreover, it could be activated actively or passively. Based on the previous battle in the building, as well as the time interval between Shang Zhenhai activating his ability and being buried, Li Anping was sure that the other party's ability activation interval was at least 20 seconds. And from the time Li Anping broke through Queen of Heaven's group's encirclement until Shang Zhenhai rushed in front of Li Anping, it had only been a short 12 seconds. Meanwhile, the League of Stars group had already been beaten to pieces by Li Anping. Li Anping was also sure that in the next 8 seconds, Shang Zhenhai definitely wouldn't be able to activate his ability on his own. The only problem was the other party's passive ability activation. Li Anping still wasn't completely sure of the other party's passive ability activation conditions, but there were a few things he was sure of. First of all, in a process similar to time stop, Shang Zhenhai's body's physiological time didn't stop. He still needed to breathe. His blood still needed to flow. This could be confirmed from Li Anping's last test, Shang Zhenhai's inability to see the lightless zone during his ability activation time. Secondly, even though Shang Zhenhai's ability would be activated after being attacked, the concept of being attacked definitely had a certain range. For example, a breath, a gust of wind, the reaction force from stepping on the ground definitely didn't count. Otherwise, the current battle situation wouldn't be like this, and Shang Zhenhai probably wouldn't be able to attack himself to achieve this effect. Because he hadn't tried to do this at all, he should have already fully tested his ability. Even though there was no way to know more details. For example, Shang Zhenhai's ability's resistance to mental-type attacks, whether the passive ability had a duration during continuous attacks, or whether this type of passive ability had a limit and so on. However, Li Anping still had a few plans to deal with Shang Zhenhai in his mind. Right now, he also had time to slowly test it out. This was the reason why Li Anping decided to deal with Shang Zhenhai in the end. The other party's ability was indeed very strong, to the extent that after entering a time-stop state, as long as he had a good weapon, it was already enough to instantly kill most level 5 ability users. However, comparatively speaking, his destructive power was much weaker than other level 5 ability users. Just like now, when he was alone, he couldn't do anything to Li Anping. Even if Li Anping stood still and let him hit him, he couldn't do anything to Li Anping. That was why Li Anping would first deal with the other level 5 ability users before slowly experimenting with a method to kill Shang Zhenhai. If they joined forces, they would cause too much damage to Tianjing. Shang Zhenhai rushed towards Heavenly Queen, but after taking a few steps, he stumbled and felt dizzy. At the same time, his body went limp. He knelt down and couldn't walk anymore. He raised his head to look at the Heavenly Queen and Li Anping. The terrifying spiritual storm had completely enveloped the two of them. They were only a few meters away from him, but his head was getting dizzier and dizzier. He was half kneeling on the ground, as though he would faint at any moment. He used the last of his strength to look at his surroundings. He didn't know when, but everything around him had already become still. Li Anping's mouth was open, looking at him without moving. Heavenly Queen stopped struggling, floating in midair as if she was dead. The spiritual storm surrounding the two of them was the same. Streaks of blue lightning that were like swimming snakes seemed to be frozen in the air, not moving at all. They were like an azure flower bouquet, wrapping around Li Anping and Heavenly Queen. In this still world, only Shang Zhenhai staggered and fell to the ground. His eyes gradually closed, as if he was about to faint. Shang Zhenhai was shocked. "I've been poisoned?" When? At this moment, he already understood that the other party had found his weakness. That was, regardless of whether it was during normal times or after activating his ability, he still needed to breathe, needed blood flow, needed a living environment. Thankfully, right now, Shang Zhenhai didn't only have his own ability. He also temporarily possessed the Heavenly Queen's 5th level ability. Blue light flashed on his body, and the 5th level ability grabbed his body and pulled him back. It was as he had guessed. It was because there was some kind of poison around Li Anping and the Heavenly Queen. After he retreated, he rested for half a minute and felt much better. He looked at Li Anping and thought, "It's colorless and tasteless." Also, the dizziness and nausea earlier. Was it carbon dioxide poisoning? Shang Zhenhai looked in Li Anping's direction. Although he was surrounded by layers of little lightning snakes, Shang Zhenhai could still see his mouth open, as if he was exhaling. That's right. With his current physical attributes, the power of his exhalation is already unbelievably strong. If he hadn't been inhaling and had only been exhaling the air in his body, then he would have been able to temporarily create an environment with a high concentration of carbon dioxide around his body. As his body recovered bit by bit, Shang Zhenhai's groggy mind became increasingly clear. My ability should have been activated after I entered an environment with a high concentration of carbon dioxide. However, although I can activate my ability this way, Li Anping has created a ring of death. Since the Heavenly Queen has a body that has undergone mental transformations, she'll be fine. But as for me, with the concentration of carbon dioxide earlier, I might not have been able to be saved if I had stayed for a few more seconds. Thinking of this, Shang Zhenhai's brows furrowed even deeper. And there's another problem. Once the duration of my ability ends, if I don't appear at the position before my ability was activated, then Li Anping will know that the carbon dioxide poisoning has activated my ability. He'll also be able to confirm that even after my ability is activated, I won't be able to survive in an environment with a high concentration of carbon dioxide. If I were to hold my breath while moving forward. Thinking of this, Shang Zhenhai looked at the two people who were surrounded by the spiritual tempest. I can hold my breath for about 1 minute. But if I have to go around those spiritual lightning bolts, capture the Heavenly Queen, and get her to bring me out, time is a little tight. I can't do this. It's too risky. Once I'm poisoned to death by the carbon dioxide, I won't be able to turn the tables. Thinking of the blood feud he had to bear, as well as his younger brother and father who had been killed by Li Anping, a hint of hatred appeared on Shang Zhenhai's face. Why don't I change to another method? To Shang Zhenhai, a long period of time had passed. However, to Li Anping and the Heavenly Queen, it was merely a short instant. In their eyes, Shang Jinhai was still maintaining his previous form, charging toward the spiritual lightning bolt. There's no effect? Seeing that Shang Jinhai had not changed at all and was still charging toward the spiritual lightning bolts, the first thing Li Anping did instinctively was to stop Shang Jinhai from being attacked and activate his passive ability. Therefore, he dragged the Heavenly Queen along, and amidst her cries of pain, he appeared several hundred meters away with a flash. Concurrently, Li Anping struck out with his palm, shattering the spiritual tempest. With the collapse of the spiritual tempest, the Heavenly Queen suffered a serious backlash. The legacy in Li Anping's hand increased its absorption speed once again. The despair in the Heavenly Queen's eyes grew increasingly intense, and her expression became increasingly dispirited. However, with this retreat, a hint of a cold smile appeared on Li Anping's face. This guy. I've been fooled. He realized that the other party was not breathing at all. Instead, he was maintaining a state of holding his breath. It was not that the carbon dioxide poisoning had no effect on Shang Jinhai. It was just that Shang Jinhai had pretended that it had no effect, making Li Anping take the initiative to leave in order to prevent Shang Jinhai from activating his ability and getting close to the Heavenly Queen. As expected, when Li Anping looked toward Shang Jinhai, the corners of Shang Jinhai's lips curled up slightly, revealing a hint of a smile. You want to play? I'll play along with you. Li Anping's expression also revealed a hint of interest. He then exerted force in his arm, using the virtual field to pinch the Heavenly Queen's spiritualized body into the size of a thumb. Then he put her into his mouth. The other party's strongest spiritual attack was ineffective against him, and the weak physical attacks were nothing to him. They were completely countered by him. At the instant Li Anping closed his mouth, Shang Jinhai stopped holding his breath and took in a few deep breaths of carbon dioxide. Then the entire world before him once again turned still. When he saw that the Heavenly Queen had been stuffed into Li Anping's mouth, fury flashed in his eyes. This be ****. He clenched his fists tightly, feeling both fury and frustration. Shang Jinhai clenched his teeth and said, Li Anping, I'll definitely kill you. He had not expected that Fang Xinjian would be so ruthless to swallow the Heavenly Queen whole. Even if Shang Jinhai could activate his powers, if he was unable to pry open Li Anping's mouth, he would not be able to save the Heavenly Queen. Moreover, Shang Jinhai did not know that Li Anping was planning to use the sword legacy to absorb the Heavenly Queen's powers. He was very worried that Li Anping would really eat the Heavenly Queen up. This won't do. Right now we're already at an absolute disadvantage. If it wasn't because Li Anping was overly confident, he would be able to defeat us just by using the defensive formation's teleportation ability. But, thinking of this, Shang Jinhai revealed a struggling expression. I can't give up on the Heavenly Queen. Moreover, if I were to escape by myself, he has the ability to teleport through space. Thinking of this, Shang Jinhai, who had a strong will, revealed a look of despair. He realized that he was at a complete disadvantage and did not have any means to turn the tables. Li Anping's abilities have completely surpassed everyone who had besieged Tianjing this time around. No, it should be said that his battle prowess is already stronger than everyone who had participated in the besiegement this time around. At the thought of this, Shang Jinhai felt more and more despair. The fury in his heart was unparalleled. Damn it, am I going to lose just like this? I haven't even been able to avenge my father's and younger brother's deaths. Am I going to die in Li Anping's hands as well? Shang Jinhai's face was contorted. The hatred and fury on his face were mixed together, making him look like a wild beast that was still putting up a fight. However, the duration would not be shortened by Shang Jinhai's fury and hatred. The ability's duration was slowly coming to an end. Shang Jinhai charged toward the training room's door as if he had gone mad. Under the attacks of his mental energy field and psychic chi, the door was quickly opened up. As he charged out, He kept on repeating to himself, "No, I can't die. As long as I'm still alive, there's still a chance." Thinking of how Li Anping had defeated the Heavenly Queen and the others like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves, the terror in Shang Zhenhai's heart increased. Drops of cold sweat kept dripping down from his forehead. "It's not a problem. With my abilities, even Li Anping will find it hard to kill me. As long as I'm determined to escape, there'll be a chance." To Shang Zhenhai's torturous time, it was just a short instant for Li Anping. He's giving up so quickly? Li Anping looked at Shang Zhenhai, who had suddenly disappeared, and a hint of disappointment appeared on his face. He spat out the Heavenly Queen from his mouth, allowing her to regain her human form. He then continued to stab the Heavenly Queen's stomach. The legacy was activated once again, continuously absorbing the psychic chi in the Heavenly Queen's body. The Heavenly Queen's countenance was already pale, but the venomous look in her eyes was getting increasingly stronger. She glared fiercely at Li Anping, as if she was accumulating her powers in preparation for the next round of confrontation. However, it was not long before a hint of bewilderment flashed on her face. Li Anping smiled and said, "What's wrong? You're looking for Shang Zhenhai? He seems to have escaped." The Heavenly Queen's lips trembled, but she was still stubborn. "It's good that he's escaped. You won't be able to kill him. I've already told him the profoundness of the 6th energy level. When he grows stronger and reaches the 6th energy level, he'll come back to take revenge on you." The Heavenly Queen cried out in a sharp voice, "Li Anping, I advise you to let me go immediately. Otherwise, you'll only be able to watch as Zhenhai grows stronger and stronger. One day, he'll kill you. You'll live in fear of death forever." Faced with the Heavenly Queen's threat, Li Anping shook his head. "It's not hard to kill him, just a little troublesome. Moreover, after I obtain your abilities, it'll be even easier. After I'm done with you, I'll go and deal with him." Saying this, he instructed, "Doctor, send Shang Zhenhai to a sealed space. I'll go and play with him one last time." From the teleportation earlier, Li Anping already knew that the defense formation, which was the doctor's phase matrix, was used to teleport people and objects by changing the spatial structure. Shang Zhenhai's passive ability would not be activated by this kind of teleportation. Before the Heavenly Queen could figure out what Li Anping meant, she heard a loud boom. She turned her head and looked in the direction of the psychic energy incarnation. It turned out that the psychic energy incarnation had punched through the air toward the tunnel that Demir Tanner had dug out. After the punch, a thin rain of blood fell from the cave. Demir Tanner had been blown up by the psychic energy incarnation's punch through the air. As for his corpse, it had probably turned into countless pieces of flesh and exploded in the tunnel. Seeing that Demir Tanner had died just like that, the Heavenly Queen's face turned even paler. This was especially so when she felt that the psychic energy in her body was getting lesser and lesser. Her spiritual force field was also getting weaker and weaker. Even her spiritualized body was showing signs of degenerating into a material state. Her expression became even more unsightly. In his heart, he was already regretting his decision to besiege this time. Right at this moment, a silvery white lightning bolt darted out from a crack in the ceiling of the training room. It formed Lady's human form in midair. "Heavenly Queen, I'm here. Where's Li Anping?" Lady, who had just finished transforming, saw Li Anping and the Heavenly Queen looking at him at the same time. Seeing the Heavenly Queen being subdued, Lady felt his scalp go numb. He could not help but gulp. Chapter 332. The Queen of Heaven had united the League of Stars, the Knights Templar, the Imaginary Authority, and Violet to besiege Tianjing. Finally, Li Anping had used the Nihility Force Field and the Spiritual Force Field to reverse the light of destruction. The Federation's ultimate weapon had been easily seized by Li Anping. After the battle, the news did not spread throughout the entire human world until 10 days later. It instantly caused a huge sensation all over the world. Regardless of whether it was the eastern or western continent, Lianping had become a hot topic. With so many level 5 ability users dying in Lianping's hands, the entire western continent's government was met with a huge earthquake. For a time, they were in a state of panic and entered a state of full preparation for war. Meanwhile, an unknown storm was about to sweep through the entire western continent. As for the eastern continent, after Lianping once again displayed his power that made people despair, all the eastern countries showed absolute obedience. In the next 6 months, one after another, they joined the Pan-Continent Alliance established by Lianping. After Lianping became the Emperor of Xia, they unanimously elected Lianping to be the leader of the Pan-Continent Alliance. Although it was not openly stated, Lianping already had the absolute power to govern all the countries in the eastern continent. After the upper echelons of Xia spread the video of Lianping's battle that was recorded by the defense array, the entire eastern continent seemed to have ushered in a storm. As for the western continent, although most of the civilians knew nothing about this, in the world of ability users, the name Lianping had become a nightmare. In the following period of time, titles such as Invincible in the Universe, World's Strongest, and God on Earth were constantly given to Lianping. This was a bloody title that was verified by almost half of the highest combat power in the entire western continent. From this moment on, the name Lianping represented the strongest in the entire human world. After that, in Xia, all kinds of information and analysis about this battle had become a compulsory lesson in all the major ability user schools, especially for combat ability users. It was considered one of the classic battles in the history of ability user battles. Of course, the Western countries thought that the big families and schools were flattering Lianping. As for the Western governments, especially the Federation and the country of law, they were even more fearful of Lianping's power. While they were fully invested in the arms race, it was said that many high-level officials were afraid of Lianping's attack, so they directly sold their family property and emigrated to other countries. This trend even caused the Federation's stock prices and real estate to plummet in a short period of time. However, the revenge they imagined did not come immediately. On the other hand, there was a young man named Tony Abel who displayed dazzling talent and ability in the Federation. He rose like a new star in a chaotic situation and gradually grasped more and more power. As for Xia, under the command of Lianping, they were not in a hurry to take revenge. Instead, they were working hard to digest the gains from the King of Gods, the League of Stars, the Knights Templar, the Federation, and the Imaginary Agency. There were rumors that in the next year, Lianping used the adamantium that he destroyed from the League of Stars robots and gathered the power of Xia Dragonfinch to create 108 weapons of different forms that were known as the Noble Phantoms. Among the 108 relics, each of them had their own unique abilities, especially the 12 most powerful relics. They were called the anti-god weapons by the busybodies. It was rumored that even if a level 2 or level 2 metahuman used the anti-god weapons, they would have the power to destroy a country. It was said that until now, only the best warriors in Xia Dragonfinch could be given the anti-god weapons by Lianping. Half a month after the Battle of Tianjing, in the newly built No. 3 training ground, Lianping's body was floating in the air. His palms were facing each other, one on the left and one on the right. At this moment, the legacy sword was floating in the middle of his palms. In Lianping's eyes, the adamantium that was once indestructible was no longer mysterious. As Lianping moved his palms gently, the sword of legacy suddenly disintegrated into countless droplets. They looked like droplets of liquid metal, quietly floating in front of Lianping. Then, the silver liquid continued to disintegrate and recombine. In Lianping's hands, it was like plasticine being molded into various shapes. The combination of the 6th-level mental energy field and the nihility energy field is still not harmonious. But at least the effect of the nihility energy field is out of the body's surface. At this moment, Lianping had put all his energy into researching the Queen of Heaven's ability and achieved great result. He could now extend the nihility energy field out of his body and use it within 50 centimeters of his body. This was a huge improvement, but Lianping was still not satisfied. He hoped to further integrate the mental energy field with the nihility energy field to strengthen the power of the two abilities. The almost indestructible adamantium was kneaded in Lianping's hands like dough. In the end, it turned into a long silver dragon that kept revolving around Lianping's body. Finally, under Lianping's control, the adamantium turned into the Sword of Legacy again and flew behind Lianping. Then, under his control, it fiercely stabbed toward the back of Lianping's head. Almost at the moment when it stabbed Lianping, the Sword of Legacy turned into a liquid state again and drilled into Lianping's spine like a stream of water. If it was an ordinary person, they would have screamed in agony after suffering this kind of injury. But Lianping was used to this kind of thing. There was no change in his expression, no pain. After Lianping absorbed the Sword of Legacy into his spine, he took a deep breath. The mental energy field of the 6th level seemed to be more easily controlled than before. This also meant that today's training had come to an end. Then, a tablet computer on the ground flew over under Lianping's control. Now, Lianping could use the nihility energy field within 50 centimeters of his body, and further away, he could use the mental energy field to affect the material world. Just like now, he grabbed a tablet computer through the air. Under Lianping's control, countless projections appeared around him. They were all projections of remote computers. There were a total of 8 projection screens in front, back, left, and right, surrounding Lianping. With the help of the mental energy field, Lianping did not even need to turn his head to see all 8 screens clearly. With the help of his brain, which was like a supercomputer, the information on the screens was quickly scanned into his brain. The 8 screens moved quickly at the same time. It looked like 8 people were constantly operating at high speed, but in fact, it was all done by Lianping alone. All kinds of information, and data were input into Lianping's brain. Most of them were all kinds of scientific and educational materials. In fact, during this period of time, while researching the nihility energy field and the mental energy field, Lianping spent a lot of time learning and revising a lot of knowledge, reading a lot of scientific materials. This was because after obtaining the mental force field, the way he looked at the entire world seemed to have changed. Countless mysteries seemed to be constantly being born and destroyed in his eyes. He felt that if he wanted to further increase his strength, or even completely fuse the mental force field into his nothingness force field to make better use of this power, more knowledge was essential. At the same time, if he wanted to increase his physical fitness again, the effect of absorbing souls was almost negligible. Even a level 5 ability user would not be of much help. Therefore, Lianping planned to use the newly obtained adamantium to make different types of Totsuka sword. He would preserve their abilities and give them to the people in the Dragonfinch to use. Paladin, Lestat, Vivian, Giant Shield, as well as Shang Zhenhai. However, when he was surrounded by the Queen of Heaven and the others, and when he was in the center of the simulated sun, Lianping felt that his physical fitness seemed to show signs of loosening up. The ultimate goal of cultivating the Hell's Map is to adapt to all kinds of extreme environments in this world. I will be able to fight under any conditions and unleash 100% of my strength. Currently, the normal environment on the surface is too easy for me. If I enter some extreme environments, it might be able to help my body evolve, adapt, and improve. However, it was not easy to find an environment that could threaten Lianping. Moreover, going to these places would often take a long time. De Xia could not leave him now, and Lianping still planned to take his time in this aspect. Therefore, Lianping still planned to temporarily stay in Tianjing and use the nihility energy field and the mental energy field to increase his combat strength. During this process, what he did the most was reading, thinking, and observing. He read all kinds of materials and documents, thought about himself, thought about this world, observed himself, and observed this world. Although there were no substantial changes to his body, his combat strength increased rapidly, as if he was riding on a rocket. Lianping flicked his finger lightly, and an air cannon shot out from his finger. The air cannon hit the metal wall fiercely, creating a series of loud sounds. Lianping could see that the situation was different. He could clearly see that the air molecules were being pressured by him, and the electromagnetic forces between the electrons and atomic nuclei in the molecules interacted with each other, creating the air cannon that he had flicked out with his finger. At the end of the day, with the exception of gravity, most of the forces that humans use on a daily basis are electromagnetic forces. If ordinary people can also grasp this electromagnetic force, they will become superhuman existences. This power can perhaps be called magnetic field rotation. However, until now, among the people that Lianping had met, only ability users such as Sun Hao, Lei Di, and Tanner were able to grasp this power. However, even they had an incomplete grasp of this power. Just as Lianping was thinking, a staff member walked in and lowered his head to report to Lianping. "Your Majesty, the funeral is about to begin." Chapter 333. Although Lianping had obtained a great victory in the Battle of Tianjing, he had still sacrificed many dragon sparrow guards, imperial guards, and soldiers in the military. The funeral this time was held for them. All of the victims were promoted by 3 levels, and their families were also compensated handsomely. Lianping had also ordered people to build a monument in the northern suburbs of Tianjing to commemorate those who had died in the battle. After this battle, de Xia's hatred for the Western continent had deepened. Throughout the funeral, de Xia Dragonfinch had shown hostility toward the Western continent, causing the Western continent's experts to be extremely worried. Of course, Lianping had also personally attended the funeral. However, he was only responsible for reading out the script he had written previously. After attending the funeral, Lianping did not go back to cultivate again. This was because he did not need any high-intensity training for the time being. It was also because he had formulated many new plans after obtaining the spiritual force field. New Dongyang inside the 8th Research Institute. Currently, the 8th Research Institute's construction had been completed. Due to the Divine King's technology and the help of countless monsters, this place had far surpassed the original 8th Research Institute in all aspects, regardless of whether it was the research facilities or the defensive capabilities. On the 24th floor underground, Shi was currently showing Lianping around the layout of this floor. The two of them walked through a long metal corridor. Every 10 meters, they would see 2 fully armed robot guards walking on caterpillar track. Every time they went a certain distance, they would need to perform pupil and sound detection before they could open the door to the next section. As they walked forward, they could see many floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Behind the floor-to-ceiling glass windows were all sorts of laboratories. Lianping could clearly see that behind each laboratory there was a large group of staff bustling about, carrying out all sorts of experiments. Shi did not miss the opportunity to report the current situation to Lianping. Regarding the current Lianping, even Shi, who was a research madman and did not care much about the secular world and etiquette, had to be careful with every word he said. That's the basic situation. We are now able to produce clones with the first level of energy. The function enhancers have also been completed, and the Dragon Sparrow Guards have been using them quite well. As such, we will begin production next month. When the time comes, we will distribute them to the entire army. It should be able to increase the physical attributes of all soldiers by at least 200%. Lianping nodded and did not say anything. His gaze was fixed on the laboratory behind a floor-to-ceiling glass door. There were 3 men and women sleeping in huge containers. They were none other than Lestat, Vivian, and Giant Shield from the imaginary agency. Next to the container, there were 4 silver-white items. They were a 3-meter-long knight's spear, a pair of wrist guards, a harp, and a 2-meter-long greatsword. These 4 props were all personally made by Emma. They were cut from the adamantium robot in the League of Stars, and then made according to Lianping's design. Although they were of different shapes, they all had the same function of the 10 swords. This was also one of Lianping's next plans. He wanted to use the adamantium from the League of Stars to make 108 10 swords. However, these 10 swords were different from the legacy. Each sword could only absorb one type of ability. However, after seeing the 3 unconscious level, 5 ability users in the containers, Lianping frowned. "Where's White Short Star?" Sherwin replied. "White Short Star tried to escape this morning, but he was caught by Lord Bai Xinghe and the others. They will be here soon." During the battle in Tianjing, White Short Star had been hiding underground due to his ability. He used the earth veins to attack or help the Empress and the others. However, after Lianping obtained the mental force field, he realized that something was wrong and quickly escaped from Tianjing. Lianping was too lazy to pay attention to him. He directly asked Fang Yuhuang and Bai Xinghe to capture him. Lianping was already one of the best level 5 ability users. After the battle in Tianjing, Fang Yuhuang had completely given up on the idea of competing with Lianping. In order to take advantage of this opportunity to perform well in front of Lianping, he gave it his all in capturing White Short Star. As for the remaining forces of the League of Stars in the Western continent, Lianping had already sent Jin Guang, Yan Bei, and Xia Laikong there. There might still be level 5 ability users among the remaining forces of the League of Stars. However, it was a good opportunity for Jin Guang and Yan Bei to train. With Xia Laikong leading the team, Lianping felt that there shouldn't be a problem. A few minutes later, the 2 of them slowly walked into the research room with a short and dark man. This was the first time Lianping saw what the other party looked like. After all, White Short Star usually hid underground and never fought with people head-on. He nodded and asked Sherwin, "Have you taken their DNA samples?" "No problem. We can produce their clones at any time." Lianping nodded with satisfaction and said, "Next, there are 2 main things to do in the research room. First, I need 10 million clones of the Heavenly Queen. All of them have to reach the first energy level. Second, I will be staying in the 8th Research Institute for half a month. I will personally create a controllable nuclear fusion reactor. In the next year, I hope you can master this technology and spread the new energy to the entire Eastern continent." Sherwin didn't have any doubts about the first thing. However, Sherwin didn't understand the second thing. Controllable nuclear fusion was a technology that was researched all over the world. Of course, the 8th Research Institute had dabbled in it as well. The only thing he couldn't understand was how Lianping was able to create a controllable nuclear fusion reactor. Naturally, he didn't know that Lianping, who had mastered both the nihility force field and the mental force field, had a grasp of the microscopic world that far surpassed everyone in the human world. If it wasn't for the fact that Sherwin and the others' current technological level wasn't enough and that it was too dangerous, he might have been able to create an antimatter engine if he had spent more time and used the 2 force field. Lianping revealed a faint smile as he watched Bai Xinghe insert the 4 swords of 10 strikes into the bodies of the 4 level 5 aptitude users and start absorbing their abilities. These 4 swords of 10 strikes were all designed by him. They were named the Steel Spear and had the abilities of Vivian, the Steel Saintess. The Harp of Death had the ability of Lestat's Violin of Death. There was also the Bracer of Strength that could absorb the stagnation of the Giant Shield's molecules. As for the giant sword that Li Anping named Battleship, it could absorb the ability of White Dwarf. These abilities didn't have much of an effect on him. However, for other people, even level 5 aptitude users, they would have a very strong effect on them. As the number of swords of 10 strikes increased, Li Anping's Xia Dragonfinch would also become more and more powerful. In addition to Li Anping's mental network plan for the 10 million clones of the Queen of Heaven, the controllable nuclear fusion technology, the King of Gods metamorphosis technology, and the psionic energy technology, Li Anping would also help the 8th Research Institute improve their technology. Li Anping believed that in less than a year, the entire Xia, or even the entire eastern continent, would go through an earth-shattering change. By then, with the help of his will avatar, Tony from the western continent would also gain a high position in the Federation. By then, it would be the time for Li Anping to fully conquer the western continent. After all, what he needed was not a piece of scorched earth but an intact continent that could join his utopia. Oh right. Li Anping looked at Shirwan and said, "Have you guys made any progress on Shangzhenhai?" "Not yet," Shirwan said in distress. "Although we've tested the various indexes of his abilities, it's still very troublesome to clone him. Moreover, he has tried to escape several times. If it weren't for the doctor, he would have succeeded. You know, it's really hard to guard against him if he wants to escape with his ability." Li Anping nodded to express his understanding. It was not difficult to kill Shangzhenhai, but it would take some means to perfectly clone him. Fortunately, the doctor's ability almost perfectly restrained Shangzhenhai's ability. With him here, there was no need to worry about Shangzhenhai escaping. Thinking of this, he said, "Then let's not bother about him for now. I'll deal with him personally after I've completed controllable nuclear fusion." At this moment, Li Anping felt a wave of psychic energy sweep past him. He turned his head to look in the direction of the laboratory and saw White Short Star's twisted face. His eyes were filled with madness and despair. It was his psychic energy that had been sweeping the surroundings non-stop. After all, with the current technological means, there was no way to detect or even stop psychic energy. When White Short Star sensed Li Anping's existence, he roared fiercely, as if he wanted to rush to where Li Anping was. However, his entire body was bound by countless superalloys, and Fang Yuhuang and Bai Xinghe were watching him from left and right. His chest was also pierced by the battleship's saber to absorb the energy. He could not break free at all. In the end, he could only use all his strength to roar at Li Anping, "Li Anping, I won't let you go even if I become a ghost." However, as soon as he finished roaring, Bai Xinghe slapped him on the head, and he could no longer say another word. Li Anping could naturally hear White Short Star's roar, but he had no interest in responding to such a loser's barking. He nodded at Bai Xinghe and Fang Yuhuang and left with Shirwan. He still had a lot of things to do in this year. However, although everything was going as smoothly as it seemed, there was still a shadow in Li Anping's heart that he could not get rid of. Because of the existence of the demon race, Li Anping had always been under great pressure. In particular, Li Anping decided to take some time to take a look at the monsters in the Codex Nation. In the western continent, in the canyon north of Rogers City. The depths of the canyon, which was originally barren with only a few mountaineers, were now bustling with noise and excitement. There were huge construction vehicles everywhere, and countless Violet workers were excavating the ruins inside. Although Violet had suffered great losses in the Battle of Tianjing, the project here in the canyon did not seem to be affected at all. At this time, in a cave in the deepest part of the canyon, a team of workers was looking at a door in front of them with a fanatical expression. A bald middle-aged man shouted excitedly, "We've finally finished collecting the blood of the chosen. John, how's it going on your side?" "It's done." "Me too. I'm done here too." Amidst a series of reports, the door in front of them, which was made of an unknown material, suddenly made a clanging sound and slowly opened inwards. Months of hard work finally paid off. Under the leadership of the middle-aged man, all the staff members began to send the robots behind the gate one by one. All kinds of data about the air, humidity, and internal environment were displayed on their instrument. When they saw the image inside the door, the middle-aged man was the first to shout excitedly, "It's the Custer people! Their ruins really exist. These ruins have a history of at least 10,000 years." In the eyes of everyone, as the robots advanced, a series of murals first appeared, and then a huge statue appeared in front of them. It was a one-eyed giant more than 10 meters tall. The giant's left hand was holding an altar that looked like a gate, and on his right hand was a little person of the same height as an ordinary person. Just when everyone was excited and determined that there was no danger behind the door and rushed in, no one noticed that the eyes of the little statue in the giant's hand seemed to move slightly. After the middle-aged man rushed in, he couldn't wait to look at the rows of hieroglyphs on the wall. It's indeed the language of Custer. This should be one of their tombs back then? Let me see. It seems to be an agreement written here? No, it's the appointed day. What's that? Suddenly, a chill rose in the middle-aged man's heart. He didn't know when, but there were no other voices around him. He turned his head abruptly, but he couldn't see anyone. But in the next moment, shrill screams resounded throughout the canyon. That night, the entire Violet team in the canyon was attacked, and no one survived. The right hand of the one-eyed giant statue was now empty. Chapter 334. In a small town in the western continent, there was a leisurely scene everywhere. This was the border of Taurus, a small country in the western continent. Taurus was a tourist country, and because it was located on the east coast of the western continent, this small town called Kantas had always been one of the famous tourist attractions in Taurus. However, it was currently the off-season for tourism, and there were only a dozen or so tourists on the streets of the small town. It looked a little bleak. In the center of the small town, in the only 5-star hotel there, a boy who looked about 1 year old was sitting cross-legged on the carpet in the room. This boy looked like he was carved out of jade. His dark eyes and handsome face made people want to pinch him a few times. Unlike ordinary children of this age, who were still crawling on the ground and playing around, and had not even learned how to walk or talk, this boy in front of him was holding a high school physics book that was about the size of his head. He flipped the pages very quickly, flipping a page every few seconds. However, he would often stop after flipping a few pages, close his eyes, and think silently for a few minutes before turning the page again. If ordinary people were to see this scene, they would definitely be very surprised. After confirming that he could indeed understand high school physics, they would treat him as a genius. However, Wei Shirshir, who was sitting on the bed beside him, was already used to this. At this moment, she was half sitting on the bed with a haggard face. Her originally radiant and beautiful image had been taken away by wrinkles, white hair, and a face full of fatigue. In recent months, the situation had become more and more difficult, especially when the core forces of the League of Stars were defeated in Tianjing City. After Shang Zhenhai's whereabouts were unknown, the entire League of Stars was on the verge of falling apart. However, De Xia did not let them go. Jin Guang, Yan Bei, and Xia Likong went to the western continent. Through Li Anping's memory of the Queen of Heaven, they went around killing the League of Stars members who were hiding in various places. This made the people on Wei Shirshir's side even more anxious. Wei Shirshir herself was on tenterhooks because of this. After all, she was the one who had offended Li Anping. If she was in Li Anping's shoes, she would definitely have a deep hatred for her. This made her unable to sleep every night after she learned about the result of the Battle of Tianjing. Countless times, she woke up in nightmares of being torn apart or eaten by Li Anping. The only thing that could comfort Wei Shirshir was Shang Zhenbang's son, Shang Tian. Shang Tian, who had just celebrated his first birthday, was now able to walk and speak on his own. He had even learned all the commonly used words in the Federation language and had self-taught himself from elementary to high school. The talent he displayed made Wei Shishir both happy and afraid. He was happy that his son had such amazing talent, but he was afraid that his son, who was only a little over a year old, would be hunted down by the strongest person in the world. Thinking of this, Wei Shishir could not help but feel worried. Lianping had yet to make a move, but just the 3 people under him had already turned the entire League of Stars upside down. Intimidated by Lianping's inhuman battle prowess, the 3 great countries in the Western Land had turned a blind eye to Jin Guang, Yan Bei, and Xiao Yekong's actions. There were even some officials who had opened the doors for them in private, attempting to befriend the king of the Eastern world. This made the situation even more difficult for the League of Stars members who were hiding everywhere. Thinking of the League of Stars' former glory and its current desolation, Wei Shishir could not help but let out a sigh. Maybe it's time to find an opportunity to put an end to this matter. When Shang Tian, who was reading a physics book, heard his mother's sigh, he lifted his head and asked calmly, "Mom, have we been hunted down recently?" Wei Shishir frowned and forced a smile. "Who told you that? We're only here for a vacation for a few days. We'll be going back in a week." However, the young Shang Tian spoke slowly with a calmness that did not match his age. "Last night, Uncle Night Beast and Uncle Sky Shatterer thought I was asleep. I eavesdropped on them." Night Beast and Sky Shatterer were the last 2 level 5 ability users in the League of Stars. Before reaching level 5, they had always been Solomon's subordinate. Their dark and vacuum abilities could perfectly cooperate with Solomon to create a space known as the Absolute Death Domain. However, there were enough high-end combat forces for the Battle of Tianjing, so the Queen of Heaven did not bring them along. Instead, she stayed behind to ensure the safety of the League of Stars. When Wei Shishir heard that it was the 2 of them who said it, she blamed them for being too careless. However, she smiled and said to Shang Tian, "The 2 uncles are just spouting nonsense. Little Tian, have you thought of a birthday present? It's been 2 weeks since your first birthday. Why haven't you thought of one yet?" Although Shang Tian was young, he did not look like a child at all. He continued to ask like an adult, "Mom, where did Master go? And where are the uncles? I haven't seen them for a few months." Wei Shishir could not stand Shang Tian's questions. Just as she was about to find an explanation, the door to the hotel room was suddenly knocked open. A bald man rushed in. When he saw Wei Shishir, he shouted, "Let's go. The Xia Dragonfinch's people are here. Sky Shatterer has already brought people to drag them away." Hearing Night Beast's words, Wei Shishir's eyes flashed with despair. She stood up from the bed and walked towards Shang Tian. She hugged the person she loved the most. She sighed deeply and said to Night Beast, "You take little Tian and leave. I'll stay." "What nonsense are you talking about? You don't have any abilities. What's the use of staying?" Wei Shishir shook her head. She looked at Shang Tian in her arms with infinite regret and said calmly, "Lianping won't let me go. If I don't die, we'll always be on the run. You take little Tian and leave. I've already prepared a child about the same age as little Tian next door." When Wei Shishir said this, how could Night Beast not understand what she was thinking? She clearly wanted to sacrifice herself to hide her son. Furthermore, Wei Shishir was certain that Lianping wouldn't let her go. If she didn't die, her son would never have a day of peace. Shang Tian was in Wei Shishir's arms. When he heard the conversation between the 2, there was no expression on his face. However, his originally calm face seemed to have become even colder. "Mom, the person who wants to kill us, is it that guy called Lianping? Did Master and Uncle both die in his hands?" Wei Shishir, who was hugging Shang Tian tightly, was shocked when she heard Shang Tian's words. "How do you know all this? Who told you?" she said anxiously. "Don't listen to other people's nonsense. After people die, they just go to another place. It's not a big deal. Thinking of this, she seemed to know that she wouldn't be able to fool her extremely precocious son. She held Shang Tian tightly and said, "Tian Tian, promise me that you won't seek revenge on Lianping." Seeing her 2-year-old son frowning, Wei Shishir said anxiously, "Promise me that you won't seek revenge on Lianping for the rest of your life. Don't go to the eastern continent. Just be an ordinary person." When Shang Tian saw Wei Shishir's haggard appearance, he immediately nodded. She then handed him over to Night Beast. Throughout the entire process, Shang Tian displayed an inhuman calmness. He didn't say a single word, as if nothing had happened. Wei Shishir looked at Shang Tian in Night Beast's arms and felt as if her heart was being pierced by a knife. "Night Beast, take good care of Tian Tian. Take care of him until he grows up." Night Beast looked at Wei Shishir, whose eyes were red as if she had aged 10 years. He sighed and nodded heavily. "Don't worry. As long as I'm alive, I won't let him suffer any grievances." Wei Shishir nodded at Night Beast with red eyes and watched as he carried Shang Tian away. 20 minutes later, when Jin Guang and Xia Likong opened the door of the hotel room, they saw Wei Shishir standing in front of the window with a little boy around Shang Tian's age in her arms. When she heard the noise behind the door, she turned around and looked at Jin Guang and Xia Likong. She said calmly, "I'm Wei Shishir. Bring me to Lianping." Jin Guang frowned and looked at Xia Likong. "Who is this woman?" "I don't know." Xia Likong shrugged. "She's just someone from the League of Stars." "Then kill her." Jin Guang looked at Wei Shishir coldly and pointed his finger. Then, a golden chi as thick as a thumb shot through Wei Shishir and the little boy in her arms. Xia Likong wanted to stop it, but it was too late. He looked at Wei Shishir's body and sighed. "You and Yen Bei are too murderous. Why didn't you listen to what she said before attacking? Plus, there's a kid. Everyone from the League of Stars must die. It's better to kill the wrong person than to let them go. This is His Majesty's order." Wei Shishir's eyes were wide open as she stared at the ceiling of the hotel. She didn't expect that they would kill her without saying anything. She also didn't expect that Lianping's order didn't include her name at all. It only included her and the entire League of Stars. Leaving behind the last trace of reluctance, regret, and despair, Wei Shishir's flame of life gradually extinguished. In the wasteland outside the town, Shang Tian sat in the arms of the Night Beast. Like a shadow, his whole body was covered in black as he quickly escaped into the distance. In his small eyes, the town was completely surrounded by flames. In the sky, Yen Bei, who used a steel spear, turned into a knight of death. Wherever he went, hundreds of small missiles were fired from his armor, turning the entire town into ruins. From the beginning to the end, Shang Tian didn't show a trace of sadness or pain. However, his eyes had unknowingly become as cold as an iceberg. From this day onwards, Shang Tian, who was only a little over a year old, didn't say a word. At the same time, in the Law Country, the area that was occupied by monsters and sealed off by the Order of Universal Truth was known as the Death Zone. At the moment, on the coastline of the Death Zone, looking from afar, one could see a deep blue light suddenly soaring into the sky from the originally calm sea. The sea within a radius of hundreds of kilometers surged as if a storm was about to arrive. In the entire Death Zone, all the monsters, whether they were lying on human corpses eating, hiding in the ruins to rest, or fighting with humans, all stood up and looked in the direction of the blue light. They opened their mouths and roared silently. At the same time, a golden-haired man sat like an emperor in the depths of the ruins. Hundreds of humanoid monsters lined up in front of him, and as if they were delicacies, they took turns to deliver themselves to the man. Initially, he had just ripped off the head of a monster in front of him and was about to stuff it into his mouth. However, at the same time, he turned his head to look in the direction of the sea and mumbled to himself, "They're finally here." The next moment, he suddenly stood up. With a slight push from his legs, he jumped into the sky. He only smashed toward the ground several kilometers away like a meteor. After leaving behind a huge crater, he jumped up again. Just like that, he moved rapidly toward the coastline like a flea. As he moved forward, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. There seemed to be drool dripping from the corners of his mouth. After being idle for so long, I can finally go all out. Humans, he let out a wild roar toward the sky. This time, I'm definitely going to have a big meal. Chapter 335. It had been 8 months since the Battle of Tianjin. At this moment, countless workers, reporters, security guards, and soldiers were walking in and out of a building in the center of Tianjin. Today was the day of the completion of the first warp gate in the eastern continent. This first warp gate connected Desia's Tianjin to Qiqing in Baihui. Originally, it would take several hours to travel by plane, but now it only took a few minutes with the warp gate. As soon as the news came out, it caused a sensation in the entire world. After all, the technology of the warp gate had always been something that only existed in science fiction. Now that it had appeared in the real world, and in Desia, the most technologically undeveloped country in the entire world, many people in the eastern continent were doubtful of this, let alone the western continent. In this newly built teleportation center building, a boy and a girl in dark green uniforms were looking around the hall with curious gazes. When passers-by looked at these two students, their eyes would occasionally show a hint of envy. Because from their uniforms, it was obvious that these two were students of Tianjin's Human Research Institute, which was one of the 9 royal schools, the Wang family's school for aptitude users. The two students seemed to be used to the envy of ordinary people around them, so they didn't show any reaction. The male student, Wang Wei, looked around the hall and said, "Qing, what do you think the warp gate looks like? Will it be dangerous?" "Don't worry, I heard that the Royal Academy of Sciences has tested it hundreds of times. There's no danger at all. The main goal this time is to run it." The Royal Academy of Sciences she was talking about was the 8th Research Institute, but it had changed its name. This girl called Qing clearly came from a powerful family. She was quite well informed about all kinds of news in Desia. She continued, "If there's no problem with the warp gate trial this time, then it will be promoted to the entire alliance. We'll try to spread the warp gate all over the eastern continent in half a year." Speaking up to here, Qing's eyes were also filled with anticipation. In the future, Tianjin will become the center of the eastern continent. All warp gates will have to reach here first, and then go through Tianjin's transit center to reach all parts of the eastern continent. In the future, even if we travel from Moloch in the ice fortress to Sta in the southernmost part of the southern border, it will only take 10 minutes at most. It's really hard to imagine the grand occasion at that time. Hearing Qing's words, Wang Wei also revealed a look of anticipation. However, he was a little worried as he said, "But this kind of warp gate consumes a lot of energy. When the time comes, only the rich can use it." Qing smiled and said, "Don't worry. I heard from my dad that all the new energy systems have been set up at the end of last month and will be activated soon. I'm afraid we won't have to worry about energy for the next 100 years. She was talking about Li Anping's plan to use controllable nuclear fusion to replace existing energy sources. Originally, it was almost impossible to reform the entire continent in one breath, and the target was a giant enterprise like the energy company. No matter how strong the leader was, it was almost impossible to achieve. However, when it came to Li Anping, as soon as he gave the order, the heads of countless opponents fell to the ground. In order to speed up the progress, Li Anping personally took action. Relying on his dazzling power that was like that of a star, he single-handedly completed the construction and layout of 70% of the entire eastern continent's circuits, reactors, machinery, buildings, and so on. There was even one time when all the materials were prepared and he spent 7 hours alone to complete the construction of a large-scale nuclear power plant. Under Li Anping's reign of terror, countless energy giants could only switch to using new energy sources. Most of the old energy installations were abandoned and dismantled by Li Anping into countless raw materials for use. In the next few months, as thousands of warp gates were activated, over 90% of the energy sources in the entire eastern continent would be replaced by nuclear fusion, with the exception of some places that were temporarily irreplaceable. Wang Wei looked at his watch and said, "It's about time. Let's go." Qing nodded. In fact, as students of the Tianjin Human Research Institute, the reason why they were participating in the Warp Gate activity this time around was because they were here to take part in the defense of the Warp Gate Center. This could be considered as part of their internship for this semester. Just then, another young man dressed in a blue and white uniform walked into the hall. When Wang Wei and Qing saw the man's appearance, their eyes immediately revealed the same expression that those ordinary people had when they looked at them earlier. They were filled with jealousy and envy. "It's Feng Haojie. Is this guy here for an internship as well?" Wang Wei's eyes revealed a hint of envy. This young man, who was called Feng Haojie, was a student from the other of the 2 aptitude user academies in Tianjin. He was a student from Academy City. As the Academy City's Sky Academy had yet to be completed, the academy was still located in the outskirts of Tianjin for the time being. As for the other 8 aptitude user academies in the country, they were all located in different cities in Xia. Although there would be competition between them, they would rarely encounter each other. This was also one of the only 10 aptitude user academies in the entire eastern continent. Li Anping did not approve any other similar academies. If they were to do it privately, they would be charged with treason. Qing's eyes were also filled with jealousy. She said softly, "This guy is really lucky. After they graduate this year, I heard that the Academy City's Sky Academy will be launched next week. All the students in Academy City will have to start studying there. The duration of their studies will also be increased to 3 years. He can directly join Xia Dragonfinch after graduating this year." This was the reason why the other 9 academies were the most jealous of Academy City. Compared to the aptitude user academies established by the 9 royal families, Academy City's principal had always been Li Anping's name. They were equivalent to the emperor's disciples. After graduating, they could directly join Xia Dragonfinch. Although the other 9 academies could separately join the police, military, or government after graduating, compared to Xia Dragonfinch, these enviable places were nothing. "Their treatment is too good," Qing said with longing. "As long as they accumulate enough learning points, they will have the opportunity to learn the secret martial arts created by His Majesty. Their strength is improving every day. I'm afraid that in the martial arts conference in 4 months, their ranking will be taken by them." The martial arts conference that Qing mentioned was originally held after the boarding of the plane last year. However, because of the Battle of Tianjin, many places in Tianjin were destroyed. In addition, Li Anping's influence was crazily expanding because of the Battle of Tianjin. Therefore, he simply postponed the martial arts conference for a year. During this time, he could also use the time to renovate Tianjin. Although the martial arts conference stipulated that Xia Dragonfinch could not participate, the students of Academy City could sign up. Moreover, during this period of time, Li Anping had created all 5 secret martial arts in his plan. Even the original 2 secret martial arts, Qi manipulation, had been greatly improved. As long as one entered the top 10 of the martial arts conference, they would have the opportunity to become Li Anping's unofficial disciple and receive the secret martial arts. This made countless people scramble for it. Just as Wang Wei and Qing were sighing, a few foreigners with blonde hair and blue eyes walked into the hall. They were the representatives sent by the Federation for this warp gate ceremony. There were people from the government, physicists, and reporters. One of them, a middle-aged man with a beer belly and a full beard, looked at the people in the hall and sneered. These Desya people actually came up with the idea of a warp gate. I don't know what their government is doing. How could they really approve the construction of such a thing? I'll definitely expose their tricks later. Compared to his attitude, another young reporter had a different opinion. He whispered, "There's news that the warp gate technology has been tested successfully. If this is true, I'm afraid the federal government will also introduce this technology. When that happens, the distance between the eastern and western continents will be closer than ever." The beer belly laughed in disdain. Obviously, he didn't believe that there was such a thing as a warp gate technology in this world. He said to a tall and thin man with a cold expression, "Dr. Homan, you'll be responsible for exposing them at the press conference later. I've already contacted the reporters. Don't be afraid. Do what you have to do. I can't let the Federation waste money on this kind of thing." The doctor named Homan nodded his head vigorously. He was just an ordinary physicist in the Federation. His main purpose for coming here with the delegation was to expose Great Sia's scam. They didn't believe that Desya, a country that was at least 20 years behind the Federation in terms of technology, could invent a warp gate technology. He was also hoping to make a name for himself internationally through this operation so that he could get funding for his research in the future. Chapter 336. Time passed quickly, and all the higher-ups of Desya, dignitaries, and representatives of various countries who came to participate in the ceremony entered the conference room one after another. This time, the Warp Gate Conference was not only the launch ceremony of the Eastern Continent's Warp Gate project, but also the invitation of many countries in the Western Continent to promote the Warp Gate to the Western Continent. However, in this era, news was generally blocked in both the Eastern and Western Continent. Apart from the higher-ups, the middle and lower classes of the Western Continent's citizens were blocked from news all year round, so they did not know much about the current situation in the Eastern Continent. A small number of middle-aged and elderly people even thought that the people of the Western Continent lived in the mountains and relied on farming, fishing, and hunting for a living. They completely regarded the Eastern Continent as a barren land. Of course, this was also related to the propaganda of the various countries in the Western Continent. Therefore, although Li Anping suppressed everyone with his almost invincible power in the field of science and technology, the officials of the Western Continent, especially the three powerful countries, were still very confident. In the conference room, hundreds of representatives from various countries in the Western Continent were sitting in rows. Sitting in the front row, there were three people in clergy clothes who were particularly eye-catching. They were the representatives sent by the Codex Nation. Currently, the Codex Nation was directly divided into two factions because the Knights Templar were wiped out in Tianjing City. One faction proposed to establish a good relationship with Desya. The Codex Nation definitely could not defeat Li Anping, so they had to rely on Li Anping. The other faction believed that there was no room for compromise with Li Anping. The Knights Templar could not be sacrificed in vain. They had to fight to the death. As long as they united, there was still hope for victory. In short, there were hawks and doves. This time, the most important mission of this representative team, which only had 3 people, was to test Desya's attitude. However, because even their superiors had not set the tone, the 3 people in the representative team did not have a clear mission. One of them, a middle-aged man with glasses who looked like a university teacher, said, "Desya Dragonfinch has 2 level 5 spatial ability users. I'm afraid that this so-called warp gate is just a pretense. It should be activated by those 2 level 5 ability users." He nudged his companion and nodded. "John, you're right. However, even level 5 ability users have limited abilities. I've seen their brochure before. They said that they would set up warp gates all over the eastern continent. I'm afraid it's a lie. I think so too. The middle-aged man named John nodded. I'm afraid that their real goal is to create a portal that connects the eastern and western continents with 2 level 5 ability users. If they succeed, the western continent will have one less obstacle in front of Lianping. While the representatives of the law country were discussing, there were still a few seats on the left side of the first row that were still empty. It was originally Tyrell's seat, but in the end, they did not send a representative over. Ever since the Battle of Tianjing, the higher-ups of Tyrol started a series of closed-door policies for unknown reasons. Until now, almost the entire country had been completely closed off from the outside world, causing a huge uproar in the western continent. Countless international companies suffered heavy losses as a result. The people from both the eastern and western continents appeared from time to time. Some reporters invited by the Xia government came to ask questions. Under the encouragement of the representative with the beer belly, the doctor named Huoman also stood up and asked a few questions. Xia has never done any spacetime research before. How did they create a warp gate in just a few months? This is all thanks to His Majesty. He was the one who developed it. Then what kind of technology do you use to create the warp gate? I don't see any equipment related to spatial teleportation in this building. Actually, we have already placed the equipment underground. However, this is confidential, so we can't show you around. No matter what Huoman asked, the representatives on the stage would either pull Lianping out and say that he solved the technical bottleneck, or say that it was confidential and they could not tell you. The people of the eastern continent were already familiar with the superpower users. Lianping was the emperor of the Xia dynasty and the leader of the Pan-Continent Alliance. His godlike power was worshipped by countless people. Huoman could do nothing about it when the spokesman pushed the blame to him. Huoman, who was also sitting in the first row, turned around and looked at Huoman with a murderous look in his eyes. Wang Ku, who was sitting next to him, said softly, "Should we send someone to teach him a lesson? He's just a clown. Don't worry about him." Huoman became more and more confident after hearing the representative's answer. Finally, he sneered and pointed at the representative's nose and said, "Maybe you can complete 1 or 2 spatial teleportation, but I strongly suspect that you are cheating with your superpower. You didn't invent the warp gate technology. What we are going to see later is a warp gate created by Xia Dragonfinch's level 5 ability user, Emma, right?" His words reflected the thoughts of most of the foreign delegates present. Unlike the people of the eastern continent who blindly worshipped Lianping, although the people of the western continent recognized Lianping's strength, it was impossible for them to admit that Xia was far superior to them in terms of science and technology. When Huoman made his point, countless flashes lit up instantly. They were all from the reporters, especially those from the western continent. They wanted to record the entire conversation between Huoman and the representative. Huoman smiled proudly. In order to become famous, he was going all out. And he believed that what he said was right. Even in the federal military, spatial teleportation technology was only a conceptual technology. How could Xia develop it in just a few months? Facing Huoman's question, the representative just smiled and said, "Everyone, I think we can use practical actions to answer Dr. Huoman's question. In fact, the room that everyone is entering is the room that will be used for warp teleportation in the future. Friends, we will meet again in Qi City." Before he could finish his sentence, everyone's body emitted waves of blue light. In the next moment, all of them lost their consciousness, and their bodies gradually disappeared from head to toe. And in the hall of the warp gate in Qi City, their bodies gradually appeared from head to toe. It wasn't until 1 minute later that everyone came back to their senses. Instantly, the whole hall became noisy. The representative shouted into the microphone, "Everyone, we have arrived in Chi City. If you don't believe me, the gate is behind. You can go out and take a look." Man was the first to rush out. When he saw that the outside of the hall was decorated exactly the same as the warp gate in Tianjin, he was overjoyed. But when he saw Bai Yueyu on the wall, the floor, and the screen, he frowned. Impossible. How could the Xia people complete the warp teleportation technology? They must be deliberately mystifying. But when he saw the scene outside the window, he was shocked. It was no longer Tianjin. It was completely the streets of Chi City. How is this possible? Is this really a warp gate? It wasn't until all the other representatives ran out and walked directly to the streets of Chi City that they accepted the existence of the warp gate with a dull face. How is this possible? This is really Bai Yueyu? Only a few minutes have passed. Everyone couldn't wait to take out their mobile phones and start making calls. Even the representative with the beer belly from the Federation made a phone call in disbelief. He really couldn't believe that Xia really had the warp gate technology. But whether he believed it or not, everyone who participated in this warp gate trial understood that the whole world was about to change. In the western mainland, on the border of the Codex Nation near the Death Zone. On the tall steel city wall, several soldiers of the Codex Nation were patrolling on the wall with machine guns. However, because the monsters have been crazily hunting the people trapped in the Death Zone for the past 2 years, the number of humans has decreased sharply. Almost less than 100 people are left. The number of monsters has also decreased sharply. It has been more than a year since they attacked the defense line established by the Codex Nation. Therefore, the soldiers on the wall were very relaxed. After taking a few glances, they gathered together and chatted. "Have you heard? A serial murder case has happened in the Federation. Hundreds of people have been dismembered. It has already caused a sensation in the Federation. Those heretics are all corrupt countries and corrupt bureaucrats. If the case happened here, I'm afraid the murderer would be caught the next day." Just as the few of them were chatting happily, a soldier suddenly pointed in the direction of the Death Zone. "Look, it seems like something is flying over? How is that possible? Are you seeing things? Monsters can't fly." Just as they were talking halfway, a total of 4 soldiers' heads flew into the sky at the same time. Blood gushed out from their wounds like a fountain, leaving 4 headless corpses on the ground. At the same time, 3 strange figures with black gas all over their bodies appeared next to the corpses. One of them was the blonde man who originally appeared in the depths of the Death Zone. However, the originally arrogant man was now standing next to the other 2 black figures with a respectful expression. The other 2 strange figures that kept on emitting black gas were about 2 meters tall. Their bodies were covered in a layer of gray carapace that seemed like bones. There were 2 long sharp horns on their heads, and their long and thick tails swayed in midair from time to time. Each time the tails slashed through the air, there would be a crackling sound. The 2 monsters that did not look like humans at all clearly had a hierarchy. The one standing at the very front appeared to be taller and stronger. He squatted down in front of the few soldiers' bodies, dipped his fingertips in the blood, and put them in his mouth. An extremely delighted expression immediately appeared on his face. "So this is a human?" The voice coming from his mouth was completely different from any known language, but one could tell that he was smiling. "I've only heard from Father that this is an extremely delicious food. It really didn't disappoint me." The blonde man at the side had come to the human world 2 years ago. At this moment, he said with a respectful expression, "Your subject thinks that the most delicious part of a human's body is their heart. Your Highness can have a taste." "Is that so?" He pointed out a finger, and an afterimage flashed by. A heart had appeared in his hand at some point in time. The monster bit down, and 1 second later, it immediately let out a series of joyful laughter. Ha 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 ha, delicious, so delicious. Living creatures like humans are really too delicious. Just then, a military officer suddenly walked out from the darkness. Waves of psychokinesis were emitted from his body, and he looked at the monster trio with killing intent. He said coldly, "Are you a new breed of human monsters? Reckless monsters, to think that you've come to kill my subordinates." When the monster that was addressed as His Highness saw this ability user, a gleam appeared in its eyes. "This human seems to be even more delicious." A few seconds later, it was already lying on the military officer's body and chewing crazily. Chewing sounds kept coming out from its mouth, and its face was filled with an excited and happy expression. It was as if an ordinary person was eating a big meal. To it, humans were a type of delicious food. Chapter 337. Western Continent, Codex Nation, Canonization Province. The raging flames, along with thick black smoke, soared into the sky within the city. As far as the eye could see, there were broken streets, collapsed buildings, electric poles with sparks flying off them, and overturned cars. The entire city seemed to have experienced the ravages of a huge earthquake, turning everything into ruins. However, what was even more terrifying was the millions of human corpses on the ground. Their blood covered the entire city like a lake, as if the entire city was submerged in a sea of blood. The pungent smell of blood could be smelled even from a few kilometers away. In such a hellish scene, the White Palace in the center of the city had now become a pile of broken walls and wreckage. The three monsters that rushed out from the death zone were now standing in the wreckage. The gray monster in the lead was called His Highness. At this moment, an old man was lying on the ground in front of him. The monster directly stepped on the old man's head, watching the old man shivering under his feet. He said with a funny face, "Fabrizio, is this the so-called highest combat power of the humans? How ridiculous." The golden-haired man at the side lowered his head and said, "Yes, this human is called the Pope. He's currently the highest combat power of the humans on this continent. There's also the Eastern Continent. Although I haven't been there, the highest combat power there is also level 5. Under the feet of His Highness, the Pope of Codex Nation only felt sincere humiliation and deep fear. This fear far surpassed the humiliation, causing him to lie on the ground without daring to move. The power of a level 5 energy was like a child's toy gun at this moment, making him feel no sense of security at all. The three monsters in front of him only took half an hour to wipe out the entire Hall of Codex Nation and 100,000 Guardian Legion, as well as killing millions of people in the city. The Pope could still see the strength of the golden-haired man, which was about level 5 energy. However, as for the other two gray monsters, the only thing the Pope could be sure of was that they were more than 100 times stronger than all the creatures the Pope had seen since he was born. "Lord, is this your test for us?" He couldn't imagine how such a thing could exist in this world. The only thing he could do now was to use his dignity to hold back the other party. Her Highness, who was stepping on the Pope's head, rubbed her chin. The sharp claws on her hands collided with the Pope's stratum corneum, producing a piercing sound. What a laughable highest combat power! However, if a few of them were to gang up on you, you would indeed be no match for them. No wonder you haven't conquered this world yet. Fabrizio smiled happily. "Thank you for your forgiveness, Your Highness." He had always been worried that the other party would punish him for not establishing a real advance base and collecting information in this world. Now, it seemed that the other party was far easier to deal with than the rumors said. His Highness did not pay any attention to Fabrizio. Instead, he set his eyes on the Pope. A series of strange sounds came out of his mouth. It was not until a few seconds later that he stuttered, "You are the Pope?" Although he was still a little inarticulate, he was already speaking the language of the nation of law. The Pope raised his head and looked at the monsters in front of him in shock. "You can talk. Impudent. Another gray monster let out a buzzing sound and tore off the Pope's arm. The Pope let out a muffled groan. One of his hands pressed hard on his shoulder. A white light had already lit up the wound, as if his body was made of light. This time, the other party did not speak the human language. He did not know what the other party meant, so he could only endure silently. The monster wanted to take another step forward, but Her Highness stopped it. "All right, Gabe. Why are you so serious with a human?" Her Highness looked at the Pope curiously and asked, "The Pope, is it? Are you willing to be my pet? I haven't had a human pet before." The first half of the sentence was still a little inarticulate, but when he reached the second half, he was no different from an ordinary person of the nation of law. "What?" Hearing the other party's words, the Pope gritted his teeth. The strong sense of shame almost made him stand up and fight to the death with the other party. However, when he thought of the other party's unfathomable strength, he restrained himself and said word by word, "A human will never be a pet." Hearing Her Highness's words, Gabe, who looked similar to Her Highness, frowned and said, "Your Highness, do you want to bring him back? Forgive me for being blunt, but with this human's physical strength, I'm afraid he won't be able to survive on our side." Her Highness nodded. She and Gabe did not care about the Pope's answer at all. It was like when a person went into a pet shop to buy a dog, who would care about what the dog thought. "Forget it, I'll just eat him." Her Highness's finger gently moved across the Pope's chest and tore off a large piece of flesh. Then, she put it into her mouth in a few bites. As she chewed, an intoxicated smile appeared on her face. She could not wait to grab a few more pieces of flesh from the Pope's body. The heart-wrenching pain spread all over the Pope's body in a short time, especially when he saw the other party eating his body piece by piece. This fear almost made the Pope collapse. Damn it, if only the Knights Templar were still here. Thinking of this, the Pope regretted the operation in Tianjing even more. Haha, it's better to eat alive. If you kill them directly, the quality of the meat will deteriorate. Her Highness swallowed another piece of flesh. Blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth, making her expression even more ferocious. But the stronger humans seemed to be more delicious. Fabrizio nodded repeatedly. Indeed, the taste of humans seems to be related to their individual strength. The stronger they are, the more delicious they are. There are probably only a few dozen of them in this world. Her Highness licked her lips. "Gabe, go back to the gate. Don't let anyone come over." The monster named Gabe did not question Her Highness's order. It nodded and flew in the direction of the death zone. This made the other two people sigh in their hearts at the same time. One of them was Fabrizio. He understood that Her Highness was planning to take all the humans in this world for herself. This was not in line with his plan. The other person was the Pope. One left. Why now? Although he had lost a lot of blood, the Pope still managed to stay conscious. He looked at the monster that had left. In just a few seconds, the monster had turned into a black dot in the sky and disappeared. A hint of disappointment appeared on the Pope's face. At this moment, His Highness suddenly raised his head. His vision, in a way that ordinary people could not reach, directly saw a total of 30 missiles flying in their direction from several kilometers away. Something is coming. When the Pope heard the voice in the sky, he was shocked. He thought to himself, "They're finally here." That was the last order he had given before he was captured by the three monsters. He was to plant 30 nuclear bombs with a yield of 10 million tons at the Hall of Legislation. As for the results of these nuclear bombs, the Pope did not care. The danger that the three monsters could cause was related to the safety of the entire human race. If these two monsters are allowed to escape, the entire human race will be in an unprecedented crisis. However, the two monsters clearly did not recognize this weapon. Her Highness asked calmly, "What is it?" Fabrizio said, "It should be something called a missile. It's a weapon invented by humans." A weapon? Hearing the word weapon, a hint of interest appeared in Her Highness' eyes. She held her chin and said slowly, "Then let's see how powerful these things are." The two monsters just stood there quietly, watching as the 30 nuclear bombs shot toward them. The Pope was delighted. If the monsters were to be hit by 30 nuclear bombs, they would not be able to survive no matter how powerful they were. The 30 nuclear bombs landed on the Pope's head at the same time. Then, there was a burst of strong light. Then, that was all. The Pope looked at the sky in disbelief. It was hard to imagine that the explosion of 30 nuclear bombs had disappeared just like that. What's going on? Is it an ability? Is this the ability of these two monsters? On the other side, His Highness sneered. Interesting. 30 nuclear bombs with a yield of 10 million tons exploded at the same time. This was the only comment she could give. In the next second, she licked her lips and turned her gaze toward the Pope once again. Compared to the so-called weapons, she was more interested in the delicacies of humans. In a valley in New Dongyang, Wang Chong and the others had left long ago. Li Anping had been standing in the valley for over 7 hours. Over the past 8 months, Li Anping's proficiency in the field of mental energy had been increasing rapidly through the research of controllable nuclear fusion reactors, the technology of the space warp gate, and the operation of the Totsuka sword. His accumulation of various knowledge had also been increasing. Therefore, although his physical attributes had not improved, his battle prowess had been increasing. It was because the research and learning over the past 8 months had allowed his brain to accumulate sufficient knowledge. He had seen through the profoundness of countless worlds, and the macroscopic and microscopic domains had never been so clearly displayed before him. Right now, the foundation of all his abilities was the most basic physical attributes such as strength, agility, and stamina. These were his foundations. Above these was the nihility force field. Expressing his physical strength in the form of a force field was equivalent to amplifying his physical battle prowess. Meanwhile, the Queen of Heaven's 6th-level mental energy field was based on his physical attributes and the nihility force field, allowing him to enter the microscopic world and carry out atomic-level operations. This was equivalent to amplifying his battle prowess once again. Therefore, no matter how many moves and methods he had at hand, Li Anping understood that his foundation was still his physical strength. The stronger his physical strength, the stronger his nihility force field, and the stronger his ability to control molecules, atoms, electrons, and other particles would become. His battle prowess would also rise steadily. Therefore, Li Anping thought of a total of 3 methods to make his battle prowess undergo a qualitative change. The first was naturally to rapidly increase his physical attribute. However, with his current value close to 40 points, it was already too difficult for him to rapidly increase it. It was already quite impossible to rely on eating clones and level 5 ability users. Next time, he would have to go to some extremely harsh environments, such as the depths of the Earth's core or the surface of a star, and see how much his body's self-evolution would help him in increasing his physical attribute. However, he was temporarily unable to find the time to do these things. The second method was naturally to once again increase his ability level. If he could reach the 6th level right now, his strength would naturally undergo a qualitative change again. Li Anping, through reading the Queen of Heaven's memories, already knew the difference between the 6th and 5th level. The so-called 6th level was a fork in the road for all ability users. Ability users who reached this level would choose between the spiritual realm and the material realm, 2 paths. Just like the Queen of Heaven, depriving herself of her physical attributes, turning her physical body into a spiritual body, this was naturally the path of the spiritual realm. Meanwhile, the other path of the material realm was one that the Queen of Heaven herself hadn't taken before. Even though Li Anping already had some leads in this aspect after half a year of research, he still needed time to slowly grind it out. That was why right now, The fastest way to increase Li Anping's battle prowess in the shortest amount of time was precisely the third method he continuously perfected during these 8 months of accumulation. To further develop his physical body's potential, Li Anping looked at his own palm. It was as if he could see through layers and layers of space. The flawless palm before his eyes were countless muscles, nerves, and bones. Then he took a step further and turned them into countless densely packed cells. Below the cells were countless molecules, atoms, and electrons that Li Anping couldn't even count. Electromagnetic forces are the true essence of my physical body's strength. Li Anping clenched his fist and suddenly punched out. As the fist wind trembled, a mountain several kilometers away let out a series of rumbling sounds. Then it turned into countless fragments and fell toward the foot of the mountain. In this punch, Li Anping could see the movement system formed by his bones and muscles, which were no longer human, transmitting his strength out in layers. He could also see that under his control, the countless cells in his body that had combined with psychic qi released the energy in his body, turning it into the power of this punch. Right now, with his astonishingly powerful self-observation ability after cultivating the blood body and the help of his spiritual force field, he could even see the effects of electromagnetic forces between each atom that formed his body. This was something that even the Queen of Heaven herself found hard to do. My physical body is a complicated structure formed from electromagnetic forces. Ordinary people would increase their explosive strength through controlling their muscles and bone. In the past, Li Anping could strengthen his cells and modify his movement system to increase his physical attribute. Right now, a power that was closer to the essence had appeared before his eyes. At this moment, Li Anping understood that regardless of whether it was Black or the Queen of Heaven, he had already taken a completely different path from them. It was a path that belonged to him. Chapter 338. Li Anping went into seclusion in New Dongyang in pursuit of greater power. The 10 million clones of the Queen of Heaven that Li Anping asked the Royal Academy of Sciences to create had already walked off the production line. Xia Zhongdu. This was Li Anping's hometown. Ever since Li Anping ascended the throne, this place had become a place where countless superhumans came to pay their respects. The local government not only built Li Anping's former residence and Li Anping's museum, but also built a 10-meter-tall statue of Li Anping at the airport and the train station. When Li Anping found out about such obvious flattery in Tianjing Imperial Palace, he laughed it off and didn't stop them. A container car stopped in the underground garage in the city center. Xia's government workers opened the container and moved the metal cans out one after another, placing them in the underground warehouse. After seeing that a total of 10 metal cans had been transported to the warehouse, the doctor sent the workers away. This was because the doctor was the only one who knew about Li Anping's spiritual network plan. Because the plan was too shocking, Li Anping didn't want too many people to know about it before it was completed. It would affect the progress of the plan. The doctor lifted the metal cans by himself and placed them into the laboratory one by one. Then, all kinds of thick wires and pipes were connected to the cans. The doctor sneered and turned on the computer in the laboratory. After a series of dazzling operations, the metal color on the surface of the metal cans slowly disappeared, completely exposing the clones soaked in yellow liquid. Looking at the Queen of Heaven's clones that seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep, the doctor's eyes revealed a fanatical look. Spiritual network plan. The doctor muttered to himself, Li Anping, no matter if it's the past or the future, I'm afraid that only you can complete this crazy plan. As a fanatical scientist, the doctor was excited and a little scared when he thought of the spiritual network plan that Li Anping mentioned. The so-called spiritual network plan was a plan that Li Anping came up with after obtaining the Queen of Heaven's spiritual force field. Li Anping's current use of the spiritual force field had always been to cooperate with the nihility force field and his own body to create all kinds of inconceivable miracles. However, the spiritual force field was a spiritual ability after all. In addition to insight into the world, it also had many abilities such as hypnosis, mind reading, suggestion, and spiritual attack. However, it was basically useless for Lianping. The Queen of Heaven used it against Lianping, but it was useless against Lianping. The spiritual network plan was based on this plan. To put it simply, Lianping hoped to use a large number of the Heavenly Queen's clones to scatter across the entire world. He would then use a mental connection to connect the minds of all the clones. This was the foundation of the spiritual network. With this as a foundation, the clones of spiritual mental energy force spiritual of heaven were all mental to their locations. In other words, the clones of heavens of heaven, they of mental of heaven Woods Lianping controlled the clones through the spiritual connection. The final effect was that Lianping could hypnotize, suggest, and even read the thoughts and memories of all the ordinary people within the range of the spiritual force field of the clones. At this stage, it was close to the ideal state in Lianping's mind. Under the coverage of the spiritual network, all the flaws that Lianping thought were bad would be forcefully removed from all the ordinary people. They would become hard-working, diligent, and righteous. In the future, every ordinary person would be able to use the spiritual network to remodel themselves and learn and work quickly through hypnosis and suggestion. For example, if a person couldn't learn the piano well, he could use the piano learning package in the spiritual network. He could set the time for 3 months, and he would be directly instilled with countless piano knowledge. He would fall madly in love with the piano for the next 3 months. During these 3 months, he would spontaneously practice the piano and love it. This feeling would only disappear after 3 months. In Lianping's vision, in such a human society, the dark side in every ordinary person's heart would be expelled. Then, they would choose their own hobbies and live according to the way they wanted. When the doctor first heard of Lianping's plan, he realized that Lianping was crazier than he had imagined. Not only did he want to rule the entire world, but he also wanted to rule every person's heart. Haha, everyone will have 8 hours of adequate sleep every day and sumptuous food. They will exercise 2 to 3 times a week. They will have 5 to 10 hobbies. They will also have a job that they are passionate about. They will have a beautiful wife or husband and a pair of children. As the doctor operated the computer in front of him, he mumbled, "The ratio of men to women will be absolutely balanced. Appearance will no longer affect people's happiness. Everyone will control their body shape and weight through a balanced diet and exercise. Violence, hatred, anger, and other negative emotions will be forcefully erased." Ha 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 ha. Looking at the devices that were gradually activated on the computer screen, the doctor laughed. "Lianping, this is the zoo that you want to build first? Then let me see if you're the one who's crazy or if the entire human race has gone crazy." The doctor could already imagine that if this plan was accidentally leaked, even if the spiritual network was unable to hypnotize superior ability users, there would still be many people who would object to it. Lianping might even become the enemy of the entire human race because of this. With the doctor's final step, the lights in the research lab lit up one by one. The Heavenly Queen's clone that was submerged in the yellow liquid suddenly opened her eyes and looked in the direction of the doctor. A weak voice was transmitted into the doctor's mind. It was Lianping's voice. "Doctor? I can sense the existence of this clone. I'm currently transmitting information to you through her spiritual force field. Did you succeed?" The doctor looked carefully at the naked clone in the container. "Not enough." A hint of disappointment appeared in Lianping's voice. "It's because this is the Heavenly Queen's clone that I'm able to control her across such a long distance through the spiritual connection. However, transmitting information through the mind is already the limit. I need more. I need more clones. Spread the spiritual force field to every corner of this world like tentacles." "I understand. I'll arrange it. Very good. The doctor asked again, Am I the only one in charge of this? Lianping's voice rang out in his mind. You're the only one for now. After I complete the spiritual network test in Zhongdu, I'll consider expanding it. While I'm in Dongyang, I'll take out 2 hours a day to debug the spiritual network. While Li Anping was implementing his plans step by step in the eastern continent, the western continent was already in a mess due to the death of the Pope. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.